Hello, horror lovers. Welcome to our channel. If you enjoy that spine-chilling sensation before going to sleep, you're in the right place. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This is really important to me. Like the video, and don't forget to comment which city you're watching from. Leave your comment now because you'll probably fall asleep after this story. Your support helps us keep bringing the best horror stories. Now turn off the lights, lie down, and get ready for a night of nightmares. I took a deep breath, surveying the mountain of cardboard boxes cluttering my new living room. The last remnants of my old life in the city, now transplanted to this quiet Chicago suburb. As I sliced open yet another box labeled kitchen, a chill ran down my spine, stopping me in my tracks. "Get it together, Jack," I muttered to myself, shaking off the feeling. But try as I might, I couldn't shake the nagging sensation that something was off about this place. The realtor had gushed about the charming neighborhood and tight-knit community, but in the week since I'd moved in, I'd yet to see a single neighbor. No welcome wagons, no friendly waves, just an eerie stillness that seemed to blanket the entire street. I unpacked a set of plates, the clink of ceramic against ceramic unnaturally loud in the quiet house. My gaze drifted to the window, drawn to the house next door. Like all the others on the street, it was a well-maintained Victorian, its paint fresh and lawn neatly trimmed. But unlike the other houses, its windows were dark, heavy curtains drawn tight even in the middle of the day. A floorboard creaked behind me, and I whirled around, heart pounding. Nothing, just the settling of an old house. I laughed nervously, running a hand through my hair. "Jumpy much?" I chided myself. It's just an empty house, for crying out loud. But was it empty? I could have sworn I saw a flicker of movement behind one of those curtains just yesterday. Then again, maybe it was just my imagination running wild in this too quiet suburb. I turned back to my unpacking, determined to focus on the task at hand. But as I worked, my mind kept drifting to the silent house next door and its unseen occupants. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. I flicked on the lights, the warm glow a comforting barrier against the encroaching darkness. That's when I heard it, a soft thump from next door, as if someone had dropped something heavy. I froze, straining my ears. For a long moment there was nothing but silence. Then, unmistakably, the sound of a door opening and closing. My curiosity got the better of me. I crept to the window, peering out from behind the curtain. A figure emerged from the neighboring house, tall, lean, and moving with an oddly fluid grace. In the fading light, I couldn't make out any details, but something about their movements sent a shiver down my spine. The figure paused, as if sensing my gaze. Slowly, they turned towards my window. I ducked back, heart hammering in my chest. Had they seen me? Several tense seconds passed before I dared to look again. The street was empty. The figure vanished as if they'd never been there at all. I stumbled back from the window, my mind reeling. What had I just seen? "Welcome to the neighborhood, Jack," a voice whispered in my head, dripping with malice. I shook my head, trying to clear the intrusive thought. This was ridiculous. I was letting my imagination run wild, spooking myself over nothing more than a neighbor going for an evening stroll. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just glimpsed something I wasn't meant to see. Something dangerous. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts. My finger hovered over my best friend's name. Mike had offered to help me move, but I'd insisted I could handle it alone. Now I wished I'd taken him up on his offer. I was about to hit call when a sharp knock at the door made me jump, nearly dropping the phone. "Hello?" a muffled voice called from outside. "Anyone home?" I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home, to hide away from whatever strangeness was unfolding in this neighborhood. But another part, the part that had always gotten me into trouble, urged me to open the door and face whatever was waiting on the other side. Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob. Hi there. A woman stood on my porch, a dazzling smile on her face. She looked to be in her mid-30s with long dark hair and striking green eyes. I'm Sarah, from across the street. I saw you moving in and thought I'd come welcome you to the neighborhood. Relief washed over me. Just a friendly neighbor, nothing sinister at all. Jack? I introduced myself, shaking her offered hand. Her skin was cool to the touch, despite the warm evening. Nice to meet you, Sarah. I hope I'm not interrupting your unpacking, she said, peering past me into the cluttered living room. No, not at all, I assured her, stepping back. Would you like to come in? I could use a break, to be honest. Sarah's smile widened, revealing perfect white teeth. I'd love to, she purred, crossing the threshold. As she passed me, that chill returned, stronger than ever. For a moment, just a split second, I could have sworn her eyes flashed red in the dim light of my entryway. I closed the door behind her, the soft click of the latch sounding ominously final. Little did I know, I had just invited something terrible into my home, and my life would never be the same. As I hefted the last cardboard box from my battered pickup truck, a gust of wind swept down the quiet suburban street, rustling the leaves of manicured lawns and sending a chill down my spine. I paused, the box heavy in my arms, and surveyed my new neighborhood. Rows of well-kept Victorian houses stretched as far as the eye could see, their windows dark and uninviting in the fading afternoon light. Welcome home, Jack, I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my gut. This was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to leave the chaos of downtown Chicago behind. So why did I feel like I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life? I trudged up the creaking porch steps of my new home, fumbling with my keys as I balanced the box against my hip. As I wrestled the front door open, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I turned, half expecting to see a neighbor coming to welcome me, but the street remained deserted. Only the curtains in the house next door swayed gently, as if someone had just been peeking out. Get a grip, I chided myself, shaking my head as I stepped into the house. The musty smell of disuse assaulted my nostrils, and I wrinkled my nose. Nothing a little air freshener won't fix, I said aloud, my voice echoing in the empty rooms. I set the box down with a thud and began the arduous task of unpacking. As I worked, the silence of the neighborhood pressed in on me, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling. No children playing, no dogs barking, not even the distant hum of traffic. It was as if the whole world had gone still. As twilight deepened into night, I found myself glancing more and more frequently at the windows, half expecting to see a face peering in at me. The house next door remained dark and lifeless, its curtains now drawn tight. You're being ridiculous, I told myself firmly as I unpacked a box of kitchen utensils. It's just an ordinary neighborhood. People are probably just private. But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trying to convince myself of a lie. The sharp ring of my cell phone cut through the silence, making me jump. I fumbled for it, nearly dropping a stack of plates in my haste. Hello, I answered, wincing at the tremor in my voice. Jack, how's the new place? My sister Sarah's cheerful voice filled the line, and I felt some of the tension drain from my shoulders. It's different, I replied, trying to keep my tone light, quieter than I expected. Isn't that what you wanted? Peace and quiet after all that city noise? I hesitated, unsure how to explain the oppressive silence that seemed to hang over the entire neighborhood. Yeah, I guess so. It's just, I don't know, Sarah. Something feels off. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was softer, concerned. Off how, Jack? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I can't put my finger on it. It's too quiet. I haven't seen a single neighbor. And the house next door? I trailed off, not sure how to describe the sense of wrongness that emanated from it. Jack, Sarah said slowly, are you sure this move was a good idea? After everything that happened? I'm fine. I cut her off, perhaps more sharply than I intended. I just need to adjust, that's all. New place, new people, it'll take time. If you say so, Sarah replied, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. Just be careful, okay? And call me if you need anything. I will, I promised, ending the call with a sigh. As if on cue, a muffled thump sounded from next door, followed by what could have been a muted cry. I froze, straining my ears. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, unmistakably, I heard the sound of breaking glass. My heart pounding, I moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The house next door remained dark and still, giving no hint of the disturbance I just heard. Should I call the police? But what would I tell them? That I'd heard a noise in a neighborhood so quiet, it was unnerving? As I debated with myself, a figure emerged from the shadows beside the neighboring house. Tall and thin, it moved with an unnatural grace, gliding rather than walking across the lawn. I held my breath, pressing closer to the window. The figure paused, as if sensing my gaze. Slowly, it turned towards my house. In the dim glow of the streetlight, I caught a glimpse of pale skin and eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. I stumbled back from the window, my heart in my throat. For a moment, I stood frozen in the middle of my cluttered living room, surrounded by the remnants of my old life and the suffocating silence of my new one. What have I gotten myself into? I whispered into the darkness. As if in answer, a soft knock sounded at my front door. I jumped, a cry of surprise catching in my throat. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Hello? A muffled voice called from outside. I saw your lights on. I'm your neighbor from next door. I thought I'd come welcome you to the neighborhood. I stared at the door, my mind racing. Every instinct screamed at me to stay quiet, to pretend I wasn't home. But another part of me, the part that had always gotten me into trouble, urged me to open the door and face whatever was waiting on the other side. With trembling hands, I reached for the doorknob. As I turned it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to step over a threshold from which there was no return. Little did I know, my life was about to change forever, and the quiet Chicago suburb I'd chosen as my refuge would soon become the stage for horrors beyond my wildest nightmares. As the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, I found myself standing at my living room window, a cup of cold coffee clutched in my trembling hands. My eyes were fixed on the house next door, its windows dark and lifeless despite the dawn breaking around us. Come on, I muttered, willing any sign of life to appear. Someone has to come out eventually. But as the minutes ticked by, the house remained as still and silent as a tomb. No lights flickered on, no curtains twitched, no door opened to let out a bleary-eyed resident heading to work. I set my mug down with a sigh, rubbing my tired eyes. I'd barely slept last night, my mind racing with questions about my mysterious neighbors and the strange figure I'd glimpsed in the darkness. You're being paranoid, Jack. I chided myself, turning away from the window. They're probably just night owls, or shift workers, or... My voice trailed off as I realized I was grasping at straws. Something was off about that house, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. As the morning wore on, I forced myself to focus on unpacking, stealing glances out the window every few minutes. The neighborhood came to life around me, cars pulling out of driveways, joggers making their morning rounds, a woman walking her dog. But the house next door remained eerily still. By mid-afternoon, my curiosity had gotten the better of me. I stepped out onto my porch, taking a deep breath of fresh air. The sun was warm on my face, a stark contrast to the chill that ran down my spine as I looked at my neighbor's house. From this angle, I could see that their lawn was immaculately maintained, the grass cut to perfection, and not a weed in sight. But there was something artificial about it, as if it were a movie set rather than a lived-in home. Yoo-hoo, new neighbor. I startled at the cheerful voice, turning to see an elderly woman waving at me from the sidewalk. She was small and plump, with silver hair and a kind face that immediately put me at ease. "Hi there," I called back, managing a smile as I walked down to meet her. "I'm Gladys," she said, offering her hand. "I live 2 doors down. Thought I'd come introduce myself and welcome you to the neighborhood." I shook her hand, grateful for the friendly face. "Jack," I replied. "Nice to meet you, Gladys." Her eyes crinkled as she smiled, but I noticed a flicker of something in her gaze as she glanced at the house next door. Concern? Fear? "So, Jack," she said, her voice lowering conspiratorially, "what do you think of our little neighborhood so far?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about my misgivings. "It's quieter than I expected," I said carefully. Gladys nodded, her expression knowing. "Yes, we do like our peace and quiet around here." She paused, then added, "I noticed you looking at the Andersons' house." "The Andersons?" I repeated, my heart quickening. "My next-door neighbors?" "That's right," Gladys confirmed. "Though I can't say I've seen much of them lately. Keep to themselves, they do." I couldn't help myself. "Have you ever seen them during the day?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Gladys's smile faltered for a moment. "Oh, well, I'm sure I must have," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "They're probably just busy people." I nodded, not wanting to press further and risk sounding like a paranoid newcomer. But Gladys wasn't finished. "You know," she said, leaning in close, "there are some who say that house is different." "Different how?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. Gladys glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Well, people have lived there for years, but they never seem to age. And sometimes, late at night, there are noises." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the muffled sounds I'd heard the night before. "What kind of noises?" Gladys shook her head. "I've never heard them myself, mind you. Just neighborhood gossip. But they say, screams. Terrible screams." I felt the blood drain from my face. Gladys must have noticed my reaction because she quickly backpedaled. "But I'm sure it's nothing, dear," she said, patting my arm. "Just old folks with overactive imaginations. I'm sure the Andersons are perfectly lovely people." I nodded numbly, my mind reeling. Gladys chatted for a few more minutes about neighborhood watch meetings and the best local restaurants, but I barely heard her. My eyes kept drifting back to the silent house next door. As Gladys finally said her goodbyes and tottered off down the sidewalk, I stood rooted to the spot, staring at the Andersons' house. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. And then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it. A curtain on the second floor twitched, just slightly. A pale face appeared for a split second, eyes locked on mine, before vanishing back into the darkness. My heart pounding, I hurried back into my house, locking the door behind me. As night fell, I found myself huddled in my living room, every creak and groan of the old house setting my nerves on edge. What secrets were hiding behind those darkened windows? And more importantly, what had I gotten myself into by moving to this seemingly quiet suburb? Little did I know, the true horrors were only just beginning to unfold. As the sun dipped below the horizon, an oppressive silence settled over the neighborhood. I paced my living room, unable to shake the feeling of unease that had been building since my conversation with Gladys. The cheerful clutter of moving boxes now seemed ominous in the growing darkness, casting long shadows across the floor. I glanced at the clock. 8:47 p.m. Still early, yet the street outside was as quiet as a graveyard. No cars passing by, no distant sounds of televisions or music from neighboring houses, just silence, thick and heavy as a wool blanket. "Get a grip, Jack," I muttered to myself, running a hand through my hair. "It's just a quiet night, nothing to be afraid of." But even as I said the words, I couldn't convince myself they were true. There was something unnatural about this silence, something that set my teeth on edge. I moved to the window, peering out at the darkened street. The house next door, the Andersons' house, stood silent and dark, its windows like black empty eyes staring back at me. I shuddered, remembering the pale face I'd glimpsed earlier. Suddenly a flash of movement caught my eye. A shadow, darker than the night around it, slipped around the side of the Andersons' house. My heart leapt into my throat. Was it just my imagination? Or had that shadow moved with an inhuman grace? I pressed closer to the window, straining my eyes to see through the darkness. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it again. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, gliding across the Andersons' lawn towards the street. My breath fogged the glass as I watched, paralyzed with a mixture of fear and fascination. The figure paused at the edge of the property, its head turning slowly to survey the street. And then, with a movement so quick I almost missed it, it was gone. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet house. As if in answer, a sound shattered the silence. A scream, high and terrified, cut off abruptly. I froze, blood turning to ice in my veins. It had come from the Andersons' house. For a moment I stood rooted to the spot, indecision paralyzing me. Should I call the police? Go check it out myself? Pretend I hadn't heard anything? Before I could make up my mind, another scream pierced the night. Closer this time, as if it had come from just outside my door. This one didn't cut off, but grew in intensity, a wail of pure terror and agony that seemed to go on forever. My paralysis broke. I lunged for my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice was a lifeline in the chaos. I need help, I stammered. There are screams coming from my neighbor's house. I think someone's hurt. Sir, can you give me your address? I rattled off my address, words tumbling out in a rush. Please hurry, I added, my voice cracking. I think... My words were cut off by another scream, this one so close it could have been in the room with me. I whirled around, expecting to see some nightmare creature lunging at me from the shadows. But the room was empty. Sir, are you still there? The operator's voice sounded tinny and far away. Yes, I managed. Please, just send someone quickly. Officers are on their way. Stay inside and lock your doors. Do not attempt to investigate on your own. I nodded, then realized she couldn't see me. Okay, I said. I'll stay inside. As I hung up, the screams subsided, leaving behind a silence even more terrible than before. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. I huddled in the corner of my living room, eyes fixed on the front door, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house settling. Finally, after what seemed like hours, I heard the blessed sound of sirens in the distance. Relief washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. Help was coming. Whatever was happening, the police would sort it out. But as the sirens drew closer, a new sound rose to meet them. A low, inhuman growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a primal part of my brain screamed at me to run, to hide, to do anything to get away from whatever was making that sound. The growl rose in pitch and volume, drowning out the sirens, filling the air with its terrible resonance. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it did nothing to block out the sound. It vibrated in my chest, in my bones, in the very core of my being. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I lowered my hands slowly, ears ringing in the aftermath. The sirens had gone quiet too. Had the police arrived? Were they investigating even now? With shaking legs, I made my way to the window, peering out into the night. The street was empty. No police cars, no flashing lights. Nothing to indicate that anyone had heard the terrifying sounds that had filled the air just moments ago. As I stood there trying to make sense of what had just happened, a movement across the street caught my eye. A figure stood on the sidewalk, looking directly at my house. Even in the dim light of the street lamps, I could see that its eyes glowed with an unnatural red light. Our gazes locked, and a voice that was not a voice whispered in my mind. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Jack. We've been waiting for you." The figure smiled, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth, then melted into the shadows as if it had never been there at all. I stumbled back from the window, my mind reeling. What had I just seen? What were these creatures that seemed to prowl the night? And most terrifyingly of all, what did they want with me? As I sank to the floor, back pressed against the wall, one thing became crystal clear. This quiet Chicago suburb was harboring dark secrets, and I was now trapped in the middle of a nightmare from which there might be no waking. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling as the digital clock on my nightstand ticked relentlessly forward. 2:17 a.m., 2:18 a.m., 2:19 a.m. Sleep eluded me, chased away by the memory of that terrifying voice in my head and the glowing red eyes that had bored into mine. The house creaked and settled around me, each sound making me flinch. Was it just the normal noises of an old building or something more sinister? I couldn't be sure anymore. "This is ridiculous," I muttered to myself, sitting up and rubbing my eyes. "You're a grown man, Jack. Get it together." But even as I chided myself, I couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness that permeated the air. The silence outside was unnatural, oppressive. No crickets chirping, no distant traffic, not even the rustle of wind through the trees. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, wincing as my feet touched the cold hardwood floor. Maybe a glass of water would help calm my nerves. I padded quietly down the hallway, trying to ignore the way the shadows seemed to reach for me as I passed. As I entered the kitchen, a floorboard creaked behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding, but the hallway was empty. Just my imagination playing tricks on me. I let out a shaky breath and turned back to the sink. That's when I heard it. A scream, high and terrified, piercing through the silence of the night. It came from next door, from the Andersons' house. I froze, the glass slipping from my fingers and shattering on the floor. The sound echoed in the quiet house, but I barely noticed. My eyes were fixed on the window, staring at the darkened house next door. The scream came again, louder this time, filled with a pain and terror that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just a scream of fear. It was the sound of someone being hurt, being torn apart. "Oh God," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What's happening over there?" I should call the police. That was the sensible thing to do. But as I reached for my phone, another sound joined the screams. A low, guttural growl that was decidedly inhuman. It rose in pitch, becoming a roar that shook the windows and rattled the dishes in my cabinets. The screaming abruptly cut off, leaving behind a silence even more terrible than before. My fingers hovered over the phone's keypad. What would I even say to the police? That I'd heard screams and an inhuman roar from my neighbor's house? They'd think I was crazy or playing a prank. As I debated with myself, a movement outside caught my eye. I peered out the window, squinting into the darkness. A figure was moving across the Andersons' lawn, dragging something behind it, something large and limp. My breath caught in my throat. Was that a body? The figure paused as if sensing my gaze. Slowly it turned towards my house. Even from this distance I could see its eyes glowing red in the darkness. I stumbled back from the window, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare, some terrifying dream brought on by stress and an overactive imagination. But I knew deep in my bones that this was all too real. I sank to the floor, heedless of the broken glass around me, and pulled my knees to my chest. What should I do? What could I do? As if in answer to my unspoken questions, my phone buzzed on the counter. I jumped, a small cry escaping my lips. With shaking hands, I reached for it, half expecting to see a message from whatever inhuman thing was prowling outside. Instead, it was a text from my sister, Sarah. "Hey Jack, just checking in. How's the new place getting settled okay? I stared at the message, tears welling up in my eyes. How could I possibly explain what was happening? She'd think I'd lost my mind. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I should tell her everything was fine, that I was just having trouble sleeping in a new place, that there was nothing to worry about. But before I could type a response, another scream shattered the night. This one closer, as if it had come from just outside my door. I dropped the phone, scrambling back until I hit the wall. No, 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 I whimpered, pressing my hands over my ears. But it did nothing to block out the sounds of terror and pain that filled the air. The screams went on, punctuated by that inhuman growl. I lost track of time, huddled there on my kitchen floor, surrounded by broken glass and terror. When silence finally fell again, I slowly lowered my hands, ears ringing in the aftermath. The night outside my window was as dark and still as ever, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better now. I knew that something evil stalked this quiet suburban neighborhood, something that hunted in the night, that fed on fear and pain. As the first rays of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here. I had to leave, had to get as far away from this place as possible. But even as I thought it, a chilling realization crept over me. What if it was already too late? What if, by moving into this house, by bearing witness to the horrors next door, I had already become a part of whatever dark secret this neighborhood held? I looked out the window one last time, watching as the sun rose over the seemingly peaceful street. The Andersons' house stood silent and still, giving no hint of the nightmarish sounds that had emanated from it just hours before. As I turned away, a whisper echoed in my mind, soft but undeniably there. "Welcome home, Jack. You're one of us now." I shuddered, knowing that my nights of terror were far from over. They were only just beginning. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I found myself once again standing at my living room window, eyes fixed on the house next door. The events of the night before felt like a distant nightmare, but the lingering sense of dread in my gut told me it had been all too real. The Andersons' house stood silent and still, its windows dark, despite the bright morning light. The lawn was immaculate as ever, showing no signs of the terrifying activity I'd witnessed in the dark hours of the night. No police tape, no signs of disturbance, nothing to indicate that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. I rubbed my eyes, exhaustion weighing heavily on me. I'd barely slept, jumping at every creak and groan of the house settling. Now, in the harsh light of day, I couldn't help but question my own sanity. Had I really seen what I thought I'd seen? Heard what I thought I'd heard? "Get it together, Jack," I muttered to myself, running a hand through my disheveled hair. "You're not crazy. Something's going on here and you're going to figure it out." With a determined nod, I turned away from the window and headed for the shower. The hot water did little to wash away my unease, but at least I felt more human by the time I emerged, clean-shaven and dressed in fresh clothes. As I made my way downstairs, a knock at the front door stopped me in my tracks. My heart rate spiked, memories of last night's terrors flashing through my mind. Taking a deep breath, I approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. To my relief, it was just Gladys, the elderly neighbor I'd met yesterday. I opened the door, forcing a smile onto my face. "Good morning, Jack," Gladys chirped, her cheerful demeanor a stark contrast to my frayed nerves. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just wanted to check in and see how you're settling in." "Morning, Gladys," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. "No, you're not disturbing me at all. Come on in." As Gladys tottered into my living room, I couldn't help but notice the way her eyes darted around, taking in every detail. Was she just being nosy, or was there something more to her interest? "You've certainly been busy unpacking," she commented, gesturing to the boxes still scattered around the room. "How are you finding the neighborhood so far?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "It's quiet," I said finally, watching her reaction carefully. "Maybe a little too quiet, actually." Gladys's smile faltered for just a moment before she caught herself. "Oh, well, we do value our peace and quiet around here," she said, her tone just a touch too bright. "It takes some getting used to, I'm sure, especially if you're coming from the city." I nodded, deciding to push a little further. "Actually, Gladys, I was hoping you might be able to tell me a bit more about the neighbors. The Andersons next door? I haven't seen them around." The change in Gladys's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. Her shoulders tensed, and the corners of her mouth tightened. "Oh, the Andersons," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "They keep to themselves mostly. I'm sure you'll see them eventually." "Eventually?" I pressed. "Do they work night shifts or something? I haven't seen any signs of life over there at all." Gladys laughed, but the sound was strained. "Oh, I'm sure they're just busy. You know how it is these days, everyone always on the go." I was about to push further when a movement outside caught my eye. A figure was walking down the sidewalk, the first person I'd seen out and about since moving in. I moved to the window, Gladys following close behind. The figure was a man, tall and lean, dressed in a crisp suit despite the warm weather. As he drew closer to my house, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something off about his movements, a fluid grace that seemed almost inhuman. "Oh my," Gladys murmured beside me. "That's Mr. Anderson. What a surprise to see him out during the day." I turned to her sharply. "During the day? What do you mean by that?" But Gladys wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on Mr. Anderson, who had now paused in front of my house. He turned his head slowly, his gaze locking onto mine through the window. Even from this distance, I could see that his eyes were an unnaturally pale blue, almost white. A slow smile spread across Mr. Anderson's face, revealing teeth that seemed just a bit too sharp. He raised a hand in greeting, the movement languid and predatory. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding. Gladys remained where she was, her expression a mixture of fear and something else. Resignation, perhaps. "Gladys," I said, my voice shaking. "What's going on here? Who are these people? What are they?" She turned to me slowly, her eyes filled with a sadness that made my blood run cold. "Oh, Jack," she sighed. "I had hoped, but I suppose it was too much to expect that they'd leave you alone." "Leave me alone?" I repeated, confusion and fear warring within me. "What are you talking about?" Gladys sank onto my couch, suddenly looking every one of her years. "I suppose you deserve to know the truth," she said softly. "Though I'm not sure you'll believe me. I barely believe it myself, and I've lived here for 40 years. I sat down across from her, leaning forward intently. "Try me," I said. "After what I saw and heard last night, I'm ready to believe just about anything." Gladys's eyes widened. "You saw something? Oh dear, it's worse than I thought." She took a deep breath, her gaze darting to the window before settling back on me. "The Andersons. They're not like us, Jack. They're not human. None of them are." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean they're not human?" "I don't know exactly what they are," Gladys continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Vampires, maybe, or something even older and more terrible. They've been here for as long as anyone can remember, always in that house, always looking the same." I shook my head, trying to process what I was hearing. "But that's impossible. Someone would have noticed, would have said something." Gladys let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, people have noticed. But those who speak up, well, they don't tend to last long in this neighborhood." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the screams from the night before. "The noises I heard last night." Gladys nodded grimly. "They feed, Jack. On fear, on pain, on life itself, I think. Every so often someone disappears. A jogger who never came home, a child who wandered too far from their parents. The police investigate, of course, but they never find anything." "Why doesn't everyone just leave?" I asked, my mind reeling. "Why stay in a place like this?" "Some have tried," Gladys said, her eyes filling with tears. But they always come back. Or something that looks like them comes back. The Andersons have a way of making sure their feeding ground stays populated. I stood up abruptly, pacing the room as I tried to make sense of what I was hearing. This is insane. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Gladys looked up at me, her expression a mixture of pity and resignation. Because they've noticed you, Jack. Mr. Anderson doesn't come out during the day for just anyone. You're marked now, just like the rest of us. I felt the blood drain from my face. Marked? What does that mean? It means you're part of this now, Gladys said softly. Part of their world. They'll be watching you, waiting. And sooner or later, she trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. Sooner or later, I'd become their prey. No, I said, shaking my head vehemently. No, I won't accept that. I'll leave. I'll sell the house and get as far away from here as I can. Gladys just looked at me sadly. Oh, Jack. Don't you think others have tried that? It doesn't work. Once they've marked you, there's no escaping. Believe me, I've seen it happen too many times. I sank back into my chair, my mind spinning. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of elaborate prank or a shared delusion. Vampires weren't real. They couldn't be. But even as I tried to deny it, I knew in my gut that Gladys was telling the truth. It explained everything. The unnatural silence of the neighborhood, the strange noises in the night, the way everyone seemed to avoid talking about the Andersons. What do I do? I asked, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. How do I survive this? Gladys reached out, patting my hand gently. You live, Jack. You go about your days as normally as you can. You don't draw attention to yourself. And at night, you pray. Pray that they choose someone else to feed on. I shuddered at the callousness of it, but I understood. In a situation like this, self-preservation was all that mattered. And maybe, Gladys continued, a hint of hope in her voice, maybe someday someone will come who can put an end to all of this. A real vampire hunter like in the stories. I nodded, clinging to that slim thread of hope. Is there anything else I should know? Anything I can do to protect myself? Gladys thought for a moment. Garlic doesn't work, nor do crosses or holy water. Silver seems to hurt them, but it won't kill them. The sun weakens them, which is why they're rarely seen during the day. And whatever you do, don't invite them into your home. They can't enter without an invitation. I filed away this information, my mind already working on plans and contingencies. Thank you, Gladys, I said sincerely, for telling me the truth, for trying to help me. She smiled sadly, standing up with a groan. You're welcome, Jack. I just wish, well, I wish things could be different. But we play the hand we're dealt, I suppose. As I walked her to the door, a thought occurred to me. Gladys, I said, why did you move here? If you've known about this for 40 years, why stay? She paused at the threshold, her expression unreadable. Oh, Jack, she sighed. Don't you see? I didn't move here. I was born here. This neighborhood. It's all I've ever known. With that, she stepped out into the sunlight, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the terrifying knowledge of what lurked next door. As I closed the door behind her, I caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of my eye. Mr. Anderson still stood on the sidewalk, his unnaturally pale eyes fixed on my house. He smiled again, raising his hand in a mocking salute. I quickly shut the door, my heart pounding. As I leaned against it, trying to calm my racing thoughts, one thing became abundantly clear. My quiet suburban life had just become a waking nightmare, and I was trapped in the middle of it. The sun continued to shine brightly outside, but I had never felt so surrounded by darkness. Whatever happened next, I knew my life would never be the same. The only question was, would I survive long enough to find a way out of this horror story I now called home? As the afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows across my living room, I found myself once again drawn to the window. My eyes, as they had been so often these past few days, were fixed on the house next door. The Andersons' residence stood silent and still, its windows dark and uninviting, despite the warm glow of the setting sun. I sighed, running a hand through my disheveled hair. The weight of Gladys's revelations hung heavy on my shoulders, making every moment feel like I was walking through a waking nightmare. Vampires. My neighbors were vampires. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, if not for the cold dread settling in my stomach. "Get a grip, Jack," I muttered to myself, turning away from the window. You can't spend every waking moment staring at their house. But even as I tried to busy myself with unpacking the last of my boxes, my mind kept drifting back to the Andersons. What were they doing in there? Were they sleeping in coffins, like the vampires in old movies? Or were they awake, waiting for the cover of darkness to begin their hunt? The sharp ring of my cell phone cut through my musings, making me jump. I fumbled for it, my heart racing as I saw my sister's name on the caller ID. "Sarah," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, what's up?" "Jack." Sarah's voice was warm and familiar, a lifeline to the normal world I'd left behind. I was starting to worry. "You haven't called in days. How's the new place?" I hesitated, unsure of what to say. How could I possibly explain the situation I found myself in? "It's different," I managed finally, taking some getting used to. "Different how?" Sarah asked, a note of concern creeping into her voice. "Is everything okay?" Yeah, everything's fine," I lied, hating myself for it. "It's just quieter than I expected. The neighbors keep to themselves." "Isn't that what you wanted?" Sarah chuckled. "A break from the noise and chaos of the city?" "I guess so," I replied, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Be careful what you wish for, right?" We chatted for a few more minutes, Sarah filling me in on family gossip and her latest work drama. I tried to listen, to engage in the conversation, but my attention kept drifting back to the window, to the house next door. As we were saying our goodbyes, a movement caught my eye. I froze, the phone still pressed to my ear. "Jack? You still there?" Sarah's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Yeah, sorry," I said distractedly. "I thought I saw something. Listen, I've got to go. I'll call you soon, okay?" I hung up before she could respond, my eyes fixed on the Andersons' house. There it was again, a flicker of movement behind one of the second-floor windows, a curtain, twitching, just slightly. My heart pounding, I moved closer to the window, straining my eyes to see through the gathering dusk. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, suddenly a face appeared at the window. I stumbled back, a gasp escaping my lips. The face was pale, unnaturally so, with features that seemed too perfect to be human. But it was the eyes that held me transfixed. They glowed with an inner light, a deep, burning red that sent chills down my spine. Our gazes locked, and in that moment I felt as if I was falling into those crimson depths. The world around me seemed to fade away, leaving nothing but those hypnotic eyes. A voice, soft and alluring, whispered in my mind, "Jack, come to us, Jack." I shook my head violently, breaking the connection. The face at the window smiled, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp, then vanished back into the darkness of the house. My legs gave out and I sank to the floor, my back pressed against the wall. What had just happened? Was I losing my mind? No, I whispered to myself, clenching my fists. This is real. This is happening. As if to confirm my words, a soft knock sounded at my front door. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Had they come for me already? The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Jack!" a muffled voice called. "Are you home?" I didn't recognize the voice, but it sounded human enough. Still, I approached the door cautiously, remembering Gladys's warning about not inviting them in. "Who is it?" I called, my hand hovering over the doorknob. "It's Mike from across the street," the voice replied. "I saw you moved in a few days ago. Thought I'd come introduce myself." I hesitated, torn between my ingrained politeness and my newfound paranoia. Finally, curiosity won out. I opened the door but kept the chain on, peering out through the narrow gap. A man stood on my porch, looking to be in his mid-30s. He was average height, with a friendly face and warm brown eyes. Nothing about him screamed vampire, but then again, what did I really know? "Hey there," Mike said, offering a smile. "Sorry to bother you so late. I've been meaning to come by, but work's been crazy." I studied him for a moment, then made a decision. "No problem," I said, undoing the chain and opening the door fully. "I'm Jack. Nice to meet you." Mike's smile widened as he stepped inside. "Nice place," he commented, looking around. "You've done a lot with it already." I nodded, still on edge despite Mike's friendly demeanor. "Thanks. Still unpacking, though." Mike's gaze drifted to the window, to the house next door. A shadow seemed to pass over his face so quickly I almost missed it. "So," he said, his tone carefully casual, "have you met the neighbors yet?" I tensed, remembering the face at the window. "Not officially," I replied, watching Mike's reaction closely. "They seem to keep to themselves." Mike nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, the Andersons are private people." There was something in the way he said it, a hint of fear, or maybe resignation, that made me push further. "Do you know them well?" I asked. Mike laughed, but the sound was hollow. "Know them? No, I don't think anyone really knows the Andersons. They've lived here for, well, as long as anyone can remember." I felt a chill run down my spine. "That's odd," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mike turned to me, his eyes suddenly intense. "Listen, Jack," he said, his voice low. "I know you're new here, and I don't want to scare you. But there are things about this neighborhood, about the Andersons, things you should know." My heart began to race. Was Mike about to confirm everything Gladys had told me? "What kind of things?" I asked. Mike opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a loud crash came from outside. We both jumped, rushing to the window. In the fading light, I could see a figure sprawled on the sidewalk in front of the Andersons' house. It was a woman, her limbs splayed at unnatural angles, as if she'd fallen from a great height. "Oh God," I gasped, already moving towards the door. "We have to help her." But Mike's hand on my arm stopped me. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "No," he said firmly. "We can't go out there. Not now. Not when it's almost dark." I stared at him, bewildered. "What are you talking about? She could be seriously hurt." Mike shook his head, his grip on my arm tightening. "Trust me, Jack. That's not a person who needs our help. It's bait." "Bait?" I repeated, the word tasting sour in my mouth. "What do you mean, bait?" But even as I asked, I knew. The Andersons. This was how they lured their prey. As if summoned by my thoughts, the front door of the Andersons' house opened. A figure emerged, moving with that unnaturally fluid grace I'd seen before. It was Mr. Anderson, dressed impeccably in a dark suit despite the late hour. He paused on his porch, his gaze sweeping the street before settling on my window. Even from this distance, I could see the hungry gleam in his pale eyes. "Oh God," I whispered, stumbling back from the window. "This can't be happening." Mike pulled me further into the room, away from the windows. "Listen to me, Jack," he said urgently. "What I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but I need you to believe me. Your life depends on it." I nodded numbly, my mind still reeling from what I'd just seen. "The Andersons, they're not human," Mike continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're something else, something old and terrible, They feed on us, on our fear and our pain. Vampires, I said, the word slipping out before I could stop it. Mike's eyes widened in surprise. You know? I nodded. Gladys told me. I didn't want to believe it, but after what I've seen... Mike sank onto my couch, running a hand over his face. Then you understand the danger you're in. They've noticed you, Jack. They'll be coming for you soon. What can I do? I asked, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. How do I protect myself? Mike looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and determination. You fight, he said simply. You learn their weaknesses, and you fight. Their weaknesses? I repeated, a spark of hope igniting in my chest. You mean there's a way to stop them? Mike nodded slowly. Silver hurts them. Sunlight weakens them. And there are other methods. I can teach you if you're willing to learn. I stared at him, realization dawning. You're not just a neighbor, are you? A grim smile spread across Mike's face. No, he admitted. I'm a hunter. I came here to put an end to the Andersons and their kind. For a moment I couldn't speak. The world as I knew it had shattered, replaced by something darker and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. But in the midst of this nightmare, a lifeline had appeared. Teach me, I said finally. My voice firm despite the fear coursing through me. I want to learn how to fight them. Mike nodded, a look of respect crossing his face. It won't be easy, he warned. And once you're in this fight, there's no going back. Are you sure this is what you want? I glanced out the window to where Mr. Anderson still stood on his porch, his hungry gaze fixed on my house. In that moment, I knew there was no other choice. I'm sure, I said, turning back to Mike. When do we start? As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, plunging the neighborhood into darkness, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination settle over me. My quiet suburban life had become a battleground, and I was about to become a soldier in a war I never knew existed. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated the dimly lit living room as I hunched over it, fingers flying across the keyboard. It was well past midnight, but sleep eluded me. Instead, I found myself diving deep into the rabbit hole of local history and folklore, desperate for any information that might shed light on the nightmarish situation I found myself in. Come on, I muttered, scrolling through yet another page of search results. There has to be something here. My eyes burned from hours of staring at the screen, but I couldn't stop. Not when every shadow held potential danger, not when I knew what lurked just next door. A news article caught my eye, the headline sending a chill down my spine. Local family vanishes without a trace, 1954. I clicked on it, heart racing as I began to read. The article detailed the mysterious disappearance of the Johnson family, parents and 2 young children, who had lived in my very house almost 70 years ago. They had vanished overnight, leaving behind a half-eaten dinner and signs of a struggle. The police had investigated, but no bodies were ever found, no explanations ever uncovered. Jesus, I whispered, running a hand through my disheveled hair. How many others? Driven by a morbid curiosity, I dug deeper. More articles surfaced, each one detailing similar disappearances over the decades. Always from this neighborhood, always without explanation. The dates were spread out, sometimes years apart, but the pattern was undeniable. As I read, a sick feeling grew in the pit of my stomach. These weren't just random disappearances. They were feeding cycles. The Andersons, picking off their neighbors one by one over the years. A soft knock at my door made me jump, nearly knocking my laptop to the floor. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. Who could be calling at this hour? Jack? A muffled voice called. It's Mike. Open up, quick. Relief washed over me as I recognized the voice of my newfound ally. I hurried to the door, undoing the chain with shaking hands. Mike burst in as soon as I opened the door, his face pale and drawn. "Thank God you're awake," he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder before I closed the door. "We need to talk." I nodded, leading him into the living room. "I've been researching," I said, gesturing to my laptop. "The disappearances in this neighborhood go back decades, Mike. It's worse than we thought." Mike's expression darkened as he scanned the articles on my screen. "I was afraid of this," he muttered. "They've been here a long time, building their hunting ground." "But why hasn't anyone noticed?" I asked, frustration coloring my voice. "How can they just keep taking people without anyone putting it together?" Mike sank onto my couch with a heavy sigh. "They're careful," he explained. "They space out their feedings, choose victims who won't be missed. And they have ways of making people forget, or at least not look too closely." A chill ran down my spine at his words. "Mind control?" I whispered. Mike nodded grimly. "Something like that. It's why I've been laying low, pretending to be just another neighbor. If they knew what I really am." He trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. If the Andersons discovered a hunter in their midst, they'd stop at nothing to eliminate the threat. "So what do we do?" I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "How do we stop them?" Mike leaned forward, his eyes intense. "We gather information," he said. "We learn their patterns, their weaknesses, and then when the time is right, we strike." I nodded, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in days. "Okay," I said. "Where do we start?" Mike glanced at my laptop. "You've made a good start with the historical research. We need to compile a timeline of all the disappearances, see if we can predict when they might strike next." I pulled up a blank document, ready to start organizing the information I'd found. As I worked, a thought occurred to me. "Mike," I said slowly, "how did you know about all this? How did you become a hunter?" Mike was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice was soft, filled with old pain. "It was my sister," he said. "She disappeared 10 years ago, in a neighborhood just like this one. The police said she'd run away, but I knew better. I started digging, asking questions, and I found answers I never could have imagined." He looked up at me, his eyes hard. "That's when I learned the truth about what's really out there in the darkness. I swore I'd never let it happen to anyone else." I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "About your sister." Mike nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. "Thanks. It's why I do this, why I can't walk away even when it gets dangerous." We lapsed into silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts as we continued our research. As the night wore on, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. "Mike," I said, my voice tight with tension. "Look at this. The disappearances. They're not as random as we thought." He leaned in, scanning the timeline I'd put together. His eyes widened as he saw what I'd noticed. "Every 30 years, he muttered. "Like clockwork." I nodded, a cold dread settling in my stomach. "And if the pattern holds, they're due for another major feeding soon," Mike finished, his face grim. We looked at each other, the weight of this realization hanging heavy between us. The Andersons weren't just picking off isolated victims anymore. They were gearing up for something bigger, something that could devastate the entire neighborhood. "We need to warn people," I said, already reaching for my phone. But Mike's hand on my arm stopped me. "We can't," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "Who would believe us? And even if they did, the Andersons would know we're onto them. We'd lose our only advantage." I slumped back in my chair, running a hand over my face. "So what? We just sit back and watch as they slaughter our neighbors?" Mike shook his head. "No. We prepare. We gather weapons, learn how to defend ourselves, and we watch. The Andersons will slip up eventually, and when they do, we'll be ready." As if on cue, a scream pierced the night air, making us both jump. It was distant but unmistakable. a cry of pure terror that set my heart racing. We rushed to the window, peering out into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing. Then, a flicker of movement caught my eye. A figure was running down the street, stumbling and weaving as if injured. "Oh God," I whispered. "We have to help them." But Mike's grip on my arm tightened. "Wait," he hissed. "Look." As we watched, two more figures emerged from the shadows. They moved with that unnatural grace I'd come to associate with the Andersons, gliding rather than running as they pursued their prey. "It's happening," Mike said, his voice tight. "They're hunting." I felt sick to my stomach, knowing what was about to unfold. "We can't just stand here," I protested. "We have to do something." Mike turned to me, his eyes blazing with a mixture of determination and fear. "We will," he said, "but not tonight. We're not ready yet. If we go out there now, we'll just be adding ourselves to the body count." I knew he was right, but it didn't make it any easier to watch as the fleeing figure was overtaken by their pursuers. The scream that followed would haunt my nightmares for years to come. As silence fell once more over the neighborhood, Mike and I retreated from the window, both shaken by what we'd witnessed. "How?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How do they get away with this? Why doesn't anyone see?" Mike sank onto the couch, looking suddenly old and tired. "They have ways of clouding people's minds," he explained, "making them forget or rationalize away what they've seen. And those who do remember, well, they usually don't last long." I shuddered, remembering the hypnotic pull of those red eyes I'd seen in the Andersons' window. "Is that why you haven't taken them out yet?" I asked. "Because they can control minds?" Mike nodded. "Partly, but it's more than that. The Andersons, they're old, powerful. Taking them down won't be easy. We need to be smart about this, plan every move carefully." I nodded, trying to push away the image of that poor soul being hunted down in the street. "So what's our next move?" Mike leaned forward, his expression intense. "We need to map out their hunting patterns, figure out how they choose their victims. And we need to start training you. If you're going to survive this, you need to know how to fight." I swallowed hard, fear and determination warring within me. "Okay," I said. "When do we start?" "Now," Mike replied, standing up. "We don't have much time before they strike again. Every moment counts." As we began to plan our next moves, I couldn't help but glance out the window one last time. The street was quiet now, no sign of the horror that had unfolded just minutes ago. But I knew better now. I knew what lurked in the shadows, what waited behind the perfectly manicured lawns and picket fences of this suburban nightmare. The Andersons may have had decades to build their power, to perfect their hunting ground, but they'd never faced someone like Mike before, and they certainly hadn't counted on me. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I made a silent vow. I would survive this. I would learn to fight. And somehow, some way, I would help put an end to the terror that had gripped this neighborhood for far too long. The battle was just beginning, and I was determined to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The midday sun hung high in the sky, its warm rays a stark contrast to the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I stood on my front porch, eyes scanning the quiet suburban street, searching for any sign of the horrors I now knew lurked behind its peaceful facade. A gentle voice broke through my brooding thoughts. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I turned to see Mrs. Abernathy, my elderly neighbor from 2 doors down, shuffling along the sidewalk with her little poodle in tow. Her kind face was creased with a warm smile, but there was something in her eyes, a wariness perhaps, that made me pause. "It is," I replied, forcing a smile of my own. "How are you today, Mrs. Abernathy?" She came to a stop in front of my house, her dog sniffing at the perfectly manicured grass. "Oh, can't complain," she said with a small chuckle. "Though these old bones don't much care for the heat anymore," I nodded, unsure of what to say next. Part of me wanted to rush inside to hide away from the world and the dangers I now knew it held. But another part, the part that had been restless and searching for answers since that fateful night, urged me to probe further. "Mrs. Abernathy," I began hesitantly, "I was wondering if I could ask you something." She tilted her head, curiosity gleaming in her faded blue eyes. "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "How long have you lived in this neighborhood?" "Oh my," she said, her brow furrowing in thought. "It must be going on 50 years now. Harold and I moved here right after we got married. Of course, he's been gone these past 10 years. I'm sorry for your loss," I said softly before pressing on. "In all that time, have you ever noticed anything strange about this place?" Mrs. Abernathy's smile faltered just for a moment, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions. She knew something. "Strange?" she repeated, her voice carefully neutral. "What do you mean by strange, dear?" I glanced around, making sure we were alone on the street. "The disappearances," I said in a low voice. "The way people sometimes just vanish without a trace." The change in Mrs. Abernathy was immediate and alarming. The color drained from her face and her hands began to tremble so badly that she dropped her dog's leash. The poodle, sensing its owner's distress, began to whine softly. "Oh dear," she murmured, her eyes darting nervously up and down the street. "Oh dear, oh dear." I stepped closer, concerned by her reaction. "Mrs. Abernathy, are you all right?" She reached out suddenly, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "You need to be careful, Jack," she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't go poking around in things that don't concern you. It's not safe." "What's not safe?" I pressed, my heart pounding. "What do you know about the disappearances?" Mrs. Abernathy shook her head vehemently. "I don't know anything," she insisted, but her eyes told a different story. "And if you're smart, you'll forget you ever asked about it." She turned to leave, but I couldn't let it go. Not when I was so close to getting answers. "Please," I said, my voice cracking with desperation. "I need to know. The Andersons, they're not what they seem, are they?" At the mention of the Andersons, Mrs. Abernathy froze. Slowly, she turned back to face me, and the look in her eyes made my blood run cold. It was a look of pure, unadulterated terror. "Come inside," she said abruptly, her voice shaking. "Quickly now. It's not safe to talk out here." Stunned by this sudden turn of events, I followed her back to her house, her little poodle trotting nervously at our heels. As soon as we were inside, Mrs. Abernathy locked the door and drew all the curtains, plunging the living room into a gloomy half-light. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to an overstuffed armchair. As I complied, she busied herself making tea, her hands shaking so badly that the cups rattled on their saucers. Finally, she settled into the chair across from me, her face pale and drawn. "You're new here," she began, her voice low and urgent. "You don't understand how things work in this neighborhood. There are rules, unspoken rules. And the first and most important rule is never ever ask questions about the Andersons." I leaned forward, my heart racing. "Why? What happens if you do?" Mrs. Abernathy's eyes filled with tears. "Bad things," she whispered. "Terrible things. People who ask too many questions, they tend to disappear." A chill ran down my spine. "Like the Johnson family in 1954?" I asked, remembering the articles I'd found in my late-night research. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes widened in surprise. "You know about the Johnsons?" I nodded. "I've been doing some research. There's been a pattern of disappearances in this neighborhood going back decades, always around the same time every 30 years or so." Mrs. Abernathy slumped in her chair, looking suddenly very old and very tired. "I was just a girl when the Johnsons vanished," she said, her voice distant with memory. "I remember the police coming, the search parties, but they never found anything. It was like the family had just evaporated." "And the Andersons?" I prompted gently. Were they here then? She nodded slowly. Oh yes, the Andersons have always been here, as long as anyone can remember. They never seem to age, never seem to change, and every few decades when people start to notice, well, that's when the disappearances happen. I felt sick to my stomach, but I pressed on. Mrs. Abernathy, what are they? The Andersons, I mean. She shook her head vehemently. Don't ask me that, she pleaded. I don't know, and I don't want to know. All I know is that they're dangerous. More dangerous than you can possibly imagine. But why doesn't anyone do anything? I asked, frustration coloring my voice. Why not go to the police or the FBI? Mrs. Abernathy laughed, but it was a hollow, bitter sound. Oh, people have tried, she said. Over the years, there have been those who thought they could stop it, who thought they could bring the truth to light. Her face fell, and she looked at me with such profound sadness that it made my heart ache. They never lasted long. What happened to them? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. They disappeared, Mrs. Abernathy said simply. Or they had accidents. Terrible, unlikely accidents. And those of us who were left, well, we learned to keep our heads down and our mouths shut. I sat back, trying to process everything I'd heard. It was worse than I'd imagined. The Andersons weren't just predators. They were tyrants ruling the neighborhood through fear and violence. But there must be something we can do, I insisted. We can't just let them keep killing people. Mrs. Abernathy reached out, patting my hand gently. Oh, my dear, she said softly. I understand how you feel. I felt the same way once, long ago. But trust me when I say this. There's nothing we can do. The Andersons are too powerful, too entrenched. The best we can hope for is to stay out of their way and pray they don't notice us. I shook my head, unwilling to accept her defeatist attitude. No, I said firmly. There has to be a way to stop them, and I'm going to find it. Fear flashed across Mrs. Abernathy's face. Please, Jack, she begged, don't do anything foolish. You seem like a nice young man. I'd hate to see anything happen to you. I stood up, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. Thank you for telling me all this, Mrs. Abernathy, I said. I know it wasn't easy for you. She rose as well, her eyes pleading. Promise me you'll be careful, she insisted. Promise me you won't do anything to draw their attention. I hesitated, not wanting to lie to this kind old woman who had taken such a risk in talking to me. I'll be careful, I said finally. It wasn't exactly a promise, but it seemed to satisfy her. As I turned to leave, Mrs. Abernathy called out one last time. Jack, she said, her voice trembling, if you ever see red eyes watching you from the darkness, run. Run as fast and as far as you can. It might be your only chance. I nodded solemnly, the weight of her warning settling heavy on my shoulders. As I stepped back out into the bright afternoon sunlight, the peaceful suburban street seemed to mock me with its normalcy. How many dark secrets lurked behind those perfectly painted doors? How many lives had been shattered by the monsters next door? My resolve hardened as I walked back to my house. Mrs. Abernathy might have given up hope, but I hadn't. I couldn't. Someone had to stand up to the Andersons, had to put an end to their reign of terror. As I reached my front door, I cast one last glance at the Andersons' house. For a moment I could have sworn I saw a face at the window, pale, perfect, with eyes that glowed an unnatural red. But when I blinked, it was gone. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found Mike's number. Mike, I said as soon as he picked up. We need to talk. I've learned some things about the Andersons, and it's worse than we thought. Much worse. As I filled Mike in on my conversation with Mrs. Abernathy, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That somewhere in the gathering darkness, hungry red eyes were fixed on my house, waiting for their moment to strike. But I pushed the fear aside. There would be time for fear later. Right now we had work to do. The Andersons had ruled this neighborhood through terror for far too long. It was time someone fought back. And God help me, I was going to be that someone. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like a physical force as I paced my living room, my mind racing with the implications of what I was about to do. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, a stark reminder that night, and all its terrors, was fast approaching. I paused at the window, peering out at the seemingly peaceful suburban street. The Andersons' house stood silent and still, its windows dark and uninviting. But I knew better now. I knew what lurked behind that perfectly maintained facade. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, Mike's name flashing on the screen. I snatched it up, my heart pounding. "Mike," I answered, my voice tight with tension. "Any news?" "Nothing concrete," he replied, sounding as frustrated as I felt. "But I've been watching their house all day. There's definitely been some unusual activity. I think they might be planning something big." I ran a hand through my hair, my stomach churning with a mixture of fear and determination. "We can't wait any longer," I said, the words tumbling out before I could second-guess myself. "We need to act now before anyone else disappears." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mike spoke again, his voice was cautious. "Jack, are you sure about this? Once we take this step, there's no going back. We'll be painting targets on our backs." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I'm sure," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I can't just sit by and watch while they prey on innocent people. We have to do something." I could almost hear Mike nodding on the other end of the line. "All right," he said finally. "If you're sure, then I'm with you. But we need to be smart about this. No rushing in half-cocked. We plan every move carefully, understood?" "Understood," I agreed, relief washing over me. I wasn't in this alone. "What's our first move?" "Meet me at my place in an hour," Mike instructed. "And Jack, be careful. They might already be watching you." As I hung up, a chill ran down my spine. I glanced out the window again, half expecting to see glowing red eyes staring back at me. But the street remained quiet and empty. I spent the next hour in a frenzy of preparation, gathering everything I thought might be useful. Silver jewelry, wooden stakes I'd whittled from chair legs, bottles of holy water I'd gotten from a nearby church under the guise of being a new, very devout convert. It all seemed so absurd, like props for a B-movie rather than weapons against real monsters. But after what I'd seen, what I'd learned, I wasn't taking any chances. As the sun began to set, I slipped out of my house, constantly looking over my shoulder as I made my way to Mike's. The familiar suburban landscape seemed alien now, every shadow potentially concealing a lurking predator. Mike answered his door before I could knock, ushering me inside quickly. His living room had been transformed into a war room of sorts, with maps of the neighborhood spread out on every surface, and an impressive array of weapons laid out on the coffee table. "Jesus, Mike," I breathed, taking in the scene. "You've been busy." He nodded grimly, locking the door behind us. "Been preparing for this for a long time," he said. "Never thought I'd actually have to use it all, though." We spent the next few hours poring over maps and formulating plans. Mike had been tracking the Andersons' movements for weeks, noting patterns in their hunting behavior and potential weaknesses in their defenses. "The key is to catch them off guard," Mike explained, pointing to a spot on the map. "They're strongest at night, but they do have to rest sometimes. I think I figured out when that is." I leaned in, studying the map intently. "So we strike during the day?" Mike nodded. "Late afternoon when the sun's still up but low enough that they might risk venturing out if they're hungry enough. It's our best shot at catching them vulnerable." As we continued to plan, a nagging doubt began to gnaw at me. "Mike," I said hesitantly, "are we really ready for this? I mean, we're just two guys going up against God knows how many vampires." Mike's face hardened. "We have to be ready," he said firmly. "Because if we don't stop them, who will? How many more people have to disappear before someone takes a stand?" I nodded, pushing my doubts aside. He was right. We might not be the heroes this neighborhood deserved, but we were the only ones willing to fight. As the night wore on, we fine-tuned our plan. We would start with surveillance, gathering as much information as we could about the Andersons' routines and weaknesses. Then, when the time was right, we would strike. "Remember," Mike said as we prepared to part ways, "from this moment on, we trust no one but each other. The Andersons have ways of influencing people's minds. Anyone could be under their control." I swallowed hard, nodding. "Got it. So when do we start?" Mike checked his watch. "Tomorrow. Get some rest tonight. You're going to need it." As I made my way back home under the cover of darkness, every rustle of leaves and creaking branch set my nerves on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that at any moment a pale hand might reach out from the shadows and drag me into the night. I was so focused on watching for threats that I almost ran straight into Mrs. Abernathy, who was out walking her little poodle. "Oh," she exclaimed, startled. "Jack, dear, you gave me quite a fright." "Sorry, Mrs. Abernathy," I said, trying to calm my racing heart. "I didn't see you there." She peered at me closely, concern etching her wrinkled face. "Are you all right, dear? You look a bit peaky." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a bit tired. Long day, you know." Mrs. Abernathy nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "Jack," she said, her voice lowering to a whisper, "you haven't been asking questions, have you, about the things we discussed?" I hesitated, torn between the urge to confide in her and Mike's warning about trusting no one. "No," I lied finally. "No, I've just been keeping to myself, like you said." Relief washed over her face. "Good," she said. "That's good. You're a smart boy, Jack. Keep your head down and you'll be just fine." As she turned to go, a thought struck me. "Mrs. Abernathy," I called after her, "be careful out here at night. It's not safe." She gave me a sad smile. "Oh, my dear," she said softly. "It's never been safe. But what choice do we have?" I watched her shuffle off into the darkness, her little dog trotting at her heels. Her words echoed in my mind. What choice do we have? We had a choice. We were making it. And God help me, I hoped we were making the right one. Back in the relative safety of my house, I double-checked all the locks and drew all the curtains. As I prepared for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of a precipice. One false move, and I would plummet into an abyss from which there was no return. Sleep was elusive that night. Every creak of the house settling, every distant car horn, had me sitting bolt upright in bed, heart pounding. In the darkest hours of the night, I could have sworn I heard scratching at my window, like long nails dragging across the glass. But when I worked up the courage to look, there was nothing there. As the first light of dawn began to creep through my curtains, I finally drifted off into a fitful sleep. My dreams were plagued by visions of glowing red eyes and sharp teeth, of pale hands reaching out from the darkness to drag me down into a bottomless pit. I awoke with a start, drenched in cold sweat. For a moment, I was disoriented, the boundary between nightmare and reality blurred. Then slowly, the events of the past few days came flooding back. This was it. The day we started fighting back. As I got dressed, my hands shook with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Was I really ready for this? Could I really face down monsters that had terrorized this neighborhood for decades? But as I looked out my window at the Andersons' house, standing silent and menacing in the morning light, I knew I had no choice. Someone had to take a stand. Someone had to fight back against the darkness that had held this place in its grip for far too long. With a deep breath, I gathered my makeshift weapons and headed out to meet Mike. As I locked my front door behind me, I cast one last glance at the life I was leaving behind, the normal, peaceful existence I had sought when I moved to this quiet suburb. That life was gone now, shattered by the horrible truth I had uncovered. In its place was a new purpose, a desperate mission to save not just myself, but everyone in this neighborhood who had lived for so long under the shadow of terror. I didn't know if we would succeed. I didn't know if I would even survive the coming days. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Not anymore. As I walked down the street towards Mike's house, my resolve hardened with each step. The Andersons had ruled through fear for too long. It was time to show them that humans weren't just prey. We could fight back. We could win. And God help me, that's exactly what we were going to do. As I reached Mike's house, I took one last deep breath, trying to calm the nerves that threatened to overwhelm me. This was it. We were about to start a fight that could end in either victory or death. The stakes had never been higher. Mike opened the door before I could knock, his expression serious but resolute. "Come in," he said, stepping aside to let me pass. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The living room, still covered in maps and weapons, felt like the war room it had become. Mike led me to the table where he had spread out our plan of attack. "We'll start with surveillance," he said, pointing to a map of the neighborhood. "We need to confirm their movements and identify any weak points in their defenses. This is crucial, Jack. We can't afford to make any mistakes." I nodded, focusing on the task at hand. "Got it. What's our first move?" Mike handed me a pair of binoculars and a small notebook. "We'll split up. You take the south side of the house, and I'll cover the north. Watch for anything unusual, anything at all. Meet back here in an hour to compare notes." We stepped outside into the bright morning light, the contrast between the peaceful suburb and the war we were about to wage almost surreal. As I made my way to my assigned position, I couldn't help but feel a sense of impending doom. This was real. We were really doing this. I settled into my spot behind a cluster of bushes, binoculars trained on the Andersons' house. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one filled with the anticipation of seeing something that would confirm our suspicions. I scribbled notes in the notebook, detailing every movement I observed, no matter how small. Then, just as I was beginning to think the surveillance would yield nothing, I saw it. The front door of the Andersons' house creaked open, and a figure stepped out. It was Mrs. Anderson, her pale skin almost glowing in the sunlight. She moved with that same unnaturally fluid grace, her eyes scanning the street before settling on something, or someone, I couldn't see. I held my breath, watching as she walked towards a car parked in the driveway. She opened the trunk, revealing a large black duffel bag. My heart raced as I tried to make out what was inside, but the angle was wrong. I couldn't see. After what felt like an eternity, she closed the trunk and headed back inside. The door shut with a final, ominous click, leaving the street silent once more. I jotted down everything I had seen, my mind racing with possibilities. What was in the bag? Another victim? Supplies for their next hunt? I didn't know, but I was determined to find out. When the hour was up, I hurried back to Mike's house. He was already there, his expression grim as he reviewed his own notes. "See anything?" he asked as I walked in. I nodded, handing him my notebook. Mrs. Anderson came out with a black duffel bag. I couldn't see what was inside, but it didn't look good. Mike's eyes narrowed as he read my notes. "Same here. Mr. Anderson was in the backyard talking to someone I couldn't identify. They were too far away, but it looked serious." We sat down at the table, our notes spread out before us. "We need to find out what's in that bag," Mike said, his voice low and urgent. "And who Mr. Anderson was talking to. It's time to take the next step." I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision. "What's the plan?" Mike leaned forward, his eyes burning with determination. "We break into their house. Tonight, while they're out hunting, we need to gather as much information as we can, and if we get the chance, we take them out." The enormity of what we were planning hit me like a freight train. We were going to break into a house full of vampires, armed with nothing but makeshift weapons and a desperate need to survive. "Are you sure we're ready for this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Mike placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "We don't have a choice, Jack. It's now or never." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Okay, let's do this." As the sun began to set, we gathered our supplies and went over the plan one last time. We would enter through the back door, which Mike had observed was often left unlocked. Once inside, we would split up. Mike would head to the basement, where we suspected they kept their victims, and I would search the upper floors for any information or weaknesses we could exploit. "We stick to the plan," Mike said, his voice firm. "No heroics. We get in, gather what we need, and get out. Understood?" I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. Understood. As darkness fell, we made our way to the Andersons' house, moving silently through the shadows. The street was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft rustling of leaves in the night breeze. We reached the back door and paused, listening for any signs of movement inside. Hearing nothing, Mike slowly turned the knob, and the door creaked open. We slipped inside, the darkness swallowing us whole. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic and tangy. Blood. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves. This was it. We were in the lair of the monsters. Mike nodded to me, and we split up, moving silently through the house. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of fabric against skin, felt like a gunshot in the silence. As I crept up the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, but I forced myself to focus. We had a mission, and failure was not an option. I reached the second floor and began my search, moving methodically from room to room. The house was eerily pristine, every surface immaculate, every piece of furniture perfectly arranged. It was as if no one actually lived here. I found a study at the end of the hall, the door slightly ajar. Inside, a large desk covered in papers and an old computer screen cast a dim glow over the room. I approached cautiously, scanning the papers for anything useful. Most of it was mundane: bills, letters, receipts. But then I found it, a journal, its leather cover worn and faded. I opened it, my eyes scanning the pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. The entries detailed their hunts, their feeding cycles, their plans for the future. It was all here, the evidence we needed to expose them, to stop them once and for all. My heart raced as I read, the enormity of what I held in my hands hitting me like a ton of bricks. This was it. This was the key to bringing them down. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, followed by a shout. "Mike." I grabbed the journal and sprinted down the stairs, my heart in my throat. As I reached the bottom, I saw Mike struggling with one of the Andersons, the tall, thin figure of Mr. Anderson, his pale skin almost luminescent in the darkness. "Jack, run!" Mike shouted, his voice strained with effort, but I couldn't leave him. Not now. I rushed forward, swinging my makeshift stake with all my strength. It struck Mr. Anderson in the side, and he let out a hiss of pain, his grip on Mike loosening. Mike broke free, grabbing a silver knife from his belt. He lunged at Mr. Anderson, the blade flashing in the dim light. There was a sickening crunch as the knife found its mark, and Mr. Anderson collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing. "We have to go now," Mike shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards the door. We ran, the night air cold and biting as we fled the house. Behind us, I could hear the other Andersons stirring, their angry shouts echoing through the night. We didn't stop running until we reached Mike's house, slamming the door shut behind us. We collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath, the adrenaline coursing through our veins. "Did you get it?" Mike asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I held up the journal, my hands shaking. "I got it. Everything we need to bring them down." Mike's face broke into a tired but triumphant smile. "Good. Now the real fight begins." As we sat there, the enormity of what we had done slowly sinking in, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. We had taken the first step, and now we had the tools we needed to finish the job. The Andersons' reign of terror was far from over, but for the first time, we had a fighting chance, and we were going to make damn sure we took it. The break-in. The house seemed to watch me as I approached, its windows dark and uninviting despite the bright moonlight that cast eerie shadows across the lawn. My heart pounded in my chest, a relentless drumbeat that echoed in my ears. The weight of the journal in my backpack was a constant reminder of the importance of our mission. This was it. We were really doing this. Mike's voice crackled softly through the earpiece. "Jack, you in position?" I took a deep breath, glancing around to make sure the street was still empty. "Yeah, I'm here. Ready when you are." "Okay," Mike replied. "Stick to the plan. We go in, find the information we need, and get out. No heroics." "Got it," I whispered, more to reassure myself than anything. We had spent weeks preparing for this night. Every detail of the Andersons' house, every movement they made had been meticulously documented. We knew their patterns, their habits, and most importantly, their weaknesses. But knowing and doing were two very different things, and as I stood there staring at the ominous house, doubt began to creep in. "Jack," Mike's voice cut through my thoughts. "Stay focused. We can do this." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and steeled myself. "Right. Let's go." I moved silently towards the back door, sticking to the shadows. Mike had scouted this entrance for days, confirming it was often left unlocked. Sure enough, the doorknob turned easily in my hand and I slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind me. The air inside was stale and cold, with a faint metallic tang that made my skin crawl. I took a moment to let my eyes adjust to the darkness, then began to make my way through the house. "Basement first," Mike had said. "That's where they keep their victims." The thought made my stomach churn, but I pushed it aside. We had a job to do, and there was no room for fear or hesitation. I moved quickly but carefully, my senses on high alert for any sign of movement. As I descended the creaky wooden stairs to the basement, the smell grew stronger, a nauseating mix of decay and something else I couldn't quite identify. I reached the bottom and paused, listening. The basement was dark, the only light coming from a small, dirty window high on the wall. "Jack, do you see anything?" Mike's voice was a lifeline in the oppressive darkness. "Not yet," I whispered back. "I'm in the basement. It's pretty grim down here." I moved forward, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The basement was filled with old furniture, broken appliances, and other assorted junk, all covered in a thick layer of dust. But it was the far corner that drew my attention. A row of metal cages, each one just large enough to hold a person, stood against the wall. My heart sank as I approached. Most of the cages were empty, but one was not. Inside, a young woman lay unconscious, her wrists and ankles bound with heavy chains. She looked pale and gaunt, her breathing shallow. "Mike," I said urgently. "I found someone, a woman in one of the cages. She looks bad." "Can you get her out?" Mike asked, his voice tense. "I'll try," I replied, examining the lock on the cage. It was old and rusty, but sturdy. "I might need some tools. This lock isn't going to budge easily." "Okay, see what you can find," Mike said. "I'll keep an eye on things up here." I searched the basement, finally locating a toolbox buried under a pile of old newspapers. Inside, I found a pair of bolt cutters and some other tools that might come in handy. I hurried back to the cage and began working on the lock. It took longer than I expected, the rusted metal resisting my efforts, but eventually the lock snapped open with a satisfying click. I swung the door open and moved inside, carefully checking the woman's pulse. She was alive, but barely. "Hang in there," I whispered, starting to work on the chains. "We're going to get you out of here." As I freed her wrists and ankles, the woman stirred slightly, letting out a soft moan. I paused, unsure of what to do next. If she woke up and started making noise, it could draw unwanted attention. "Mike," I said quietly, "she's starting to wake up. What should I do?" "Try to keep her calm," Mike replied. "We can't risk her making noise. Can you carry her? I think so, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. She was small and light, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins made my muscles feel weak. I slipped my arms under her and lifted her as gently as I could. She whimpered, but didn't wake fully. I carried her up the stairs, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. As I reached the top of the stairs, Mike met me, his face grim. We need to get her out of here, now. We moved through the house, every creak of the floorboards setting my nerves on edge. Finally, we reached the back door and slipped outside into the cool night air. The street was still empty, but we didn't waste any time. We made our way to Mike's car, parked a block away, and carefully placed the woman in the back seat. Drive, Mike said, sliding into the passenger seat. I'll keep an eye on her. I nodded and started the engine, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. We drove in silence for a while, the weight of what we had just done hanging heavy in the air. Jack, Mike said finally, you did good back there. We got her out. That's what matters. I nodded, but the doubt still lingered. What if there are more? I asked quietly. What if we didn't get them all? Mike sighed, his expression pained. We do what we can, he said. We can't save everyone, but we can save her, and we can use what we found to bring them down. As we drove through the darkened streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see glowing red eyes staring back at me. But the road behind us was empty. We need to find a safe place for her, Mike said, breaking the silence. Somewhere they won't think to look. I nodded, my mind racing. I know a place, I said. There's an old cabin up in the woods, about an hour from here. It's secluded, and no one goes there anymore. Perfect, Mike said. Head there. We'll figure out our next move once we know she's safe. The drive to the cabin was tense, every shadow and passing car making my heart race. But finally we arrived. The cabin was old and run down, but it would serve our purposes. We carried the woman inside and laid her on the dusty couch, covering her with a blanket we found in a closet. She should be safe here, Mike said, checking her pulse again. But we need to keep an eye on her. She might need medical attention. I nodded, sitting down in an old armchair. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me feeling exhausted and shaky. What now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Now we rest, Mike said. We'll take turns keeping watch. Tomorrow we start planning our next move. As I settled into the chair, my eyes felt heavy. Despite the fear and uncertainty, sleep claimed me quickly. My dreams were filled with images of the Andersons, their pale faces and red eyes haunting my every thought. I woke with a start, the first light of dawn filtering through the dirty windows. Mike was sitting by the couch, watching the woman closely. He looked up as I stirred. Morning, he said quietly. She woke up a few times during the night, but she's stable. I nodded, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Good. What's our plan? Mike stood up, stretching his stiff muscles. We need to figure out who she is, he said, and we need to go through that journal. There might be information in there that can help us. I pulled the journal from my backpack, the worn leather cover cool to the touch. Let's get to work then, I said, flipping it open. As we read through the entries, the full horror of the Andersons' activities became clear. They had been hunting for decades, carefully choosing their victims and covering their tracks. The journal detailed their feeding cycles, their plans, and even the locations of other nests. This is it, Mike said, his voice filled with determination. This is the evidence we need to bring them down. I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. We need to get this to the authorities, I said. But we have to be careful. If the Andersons find out what we're doing, they won't, Mike said firmly. We'll be careful. We'll expose them, Jack. We have to. As the woman on the couch stirred again, her eyes fluttering open, I felt a surge of hope. We had saved her. We had taken the first step. And now we were going to finish what we started. Who are you? She asked weakly. her voice barely audible. I leaned forward, offering her a reassuring smile. "My name is Jack," I said. "This is Mike. We're here to help you." She looked at us with a mixture of fear and relief. "Thank you," she whispered. I thought I was going to die in that place. "You're safe now," Mike said, his voice gentle. "Do you remember what happened?" She nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. "They took me," she said. "I don't know how long I was there. It felt like forever." "We're going to stop them," I said, my voice filled with determination. "We have the evidence we need to bring them down. You're safe now, and we're going to make sure they can't hurt anyone else." As she drifted back to sleep, I felt a sense of resolve settle over me. This was far from over, but we had taken a crucial step. We had saved a life and gathered the information we needed to fight back. The Andersons had ruled through fear for too long. Now, it was our turn to fight, and we wouldn't stop until they were defeated, once and for all. I carefully cradled the journal in my hands, its worn leather cover cool to the touch, the edges frayed from years of use. The weight of it felt significant, as if it contained not just pages, but the very essence of the horrors we had uncovered. Mike and I sat in the dimly lit cabin, the morning light filtering through the dirty windows, casting long shadows across the room. Our rescued victim, the young woman, lay resting on the couch, her breathing steady but shallow. Her presence was a stark reminder of the stakes at hand. "Jack, we need to go through this journal thoroughly," Mike said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "There might be something in here that can give us a real edge." I nodded, flipping open the journal to the first page. The handwriting was neat and precise, almost clinical in its detail. It started with an entry dated back to the early 1900s, detailing the arrival of the Andersons to the neighborhood. I read aloud, the words feeling heavy in the still air. "June 15th, 1903. We have settled into our new home. The neighborhood is quiet, the perfect place to establish our sanctuary. Our feeding cycle begins anew, and we must be cautious. The townspeople are ignorant of our true nature, and we must keep it that way." Mike leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he listened. "Keep going," he urged. The entries were a chilling chronicle of their lives, documenting every victim, every disappearance, and every feeding cycle. The language was cold and detached, as if the Andersons saw their victims as nothing more than cattle. July 7th, 1912. The townspeople grow suspicious. We must be more discreet. The child was a mistake, but we needed to feed. We will relocate soon to avoid further scrutiny. I shuddered at the casual mention of taking a child. The Andersons' complete lack of empathy was horrifying. "Jack," Mike said, his voice breaking through my thoughts, "look for anything that might indicate a weakness or a way to fight them. There has to be something." I continued reading, skimming through the entries as quickly as I could without missing any important details. The journal was a treasure trove of information, but it also painted a grim picture of the Andersons' ruthlessness and efficiency. Then, I found it. An entry that made my heart race with a mix of hope and fear. August 23rd, 1945. The last attack left me weakened. The sun's rays burned more intensely than ever before. It seems our prolonged exposure to this new climate has made us more vulnerable. We must find a way to shield ourselves better. Until then, we are at greater risk. "Mike, listen to this," I said, reading the entry aloud. "They're vulnerable to sunlight. Prolonged exposure weakens them even more." Mike's eyes lit up with a mixture of excitement and determination. "That's it. That's the edge we needed. If we can expose them to sunlight, we might be able to weaken them enough to take them down." "But how do we get them out into the sunlight?" I asked, my mind racing with possibilities. Mike sat back, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "We need to draw them out somehow. Create a situation where they have no choice but to come after us during the day." A plan began to form in my mind, the pieces falling into place. What if we set a trap? I suggested. Make them think we're vulnerable. Force them to come after us. Mike nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing in thought. It could work, but it has to be convincing. We need to make them believe they're in control. As we continued to brainstorm, the young woman on the couch stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around, confusion and fear evident in her gaze. "Hey," I said gently, moving to her side. "You're safe now. My name is Jack and this is Mike. We rescued you from the Andersons." Her eyes widened in recognition, and she sat up slowly, wincing in pain. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. I thought I was going to die in that place." "Can you tell us your name?" Mike asked, his voice gentle but urgent. "Emma," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "Emma Collins." "Emma," I said, sitting beside her, "we need your help. Do you remember anything about the Andersons? Anything that might help us stop them?" Emma's brow furrowed as she tried to recall her ordeal. "They kept me in the basement," she said slowly. "I don't remember much. It was dark, and I was so weak. But I do remember hearing them talk about a ceremony, something they were planning. It sounded important." "A ceremony?" Mike asked, leaning forward. "Did you hear any specifics?" Emma shook her head. "No, just bits and pieces. They mentioned a date, but I can't remember what it was. I'm sorry." "It's okay," I said, patting her hand reassuringly. "You've been through a lot. Anything you can remember is helpful." We spent the next few hours piecing together the information from the journal and Emma's fragmented memories. The Andersons were planning something big, and it was tied to their feeding cycle. If we could disrupt their plans, it might give us the upper hand we desperately needed. As we worked, the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow through the cabin windows. The contrast between the bright, peaceful day and the darkness of our mission was jarring. "Jack," Mike said suddenly, breaking the silence, "I think I have an idea. What if we use the journal against them, leak it to the authorities, the media, expose their secrets?" I considered it, the potential impact of such a move. "It could work," I said slowly, "but we need to be careful. If they find out what we're planning, they'll come after us with everything they have." "That's why we need to move quickly," Mike said, determination hardening his voice. "We gather as much evidence as we can, then we make our move. We force them into the light, both literally and figuratively." Emma watched us, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "I want to help," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I can't just sit here and do nothing. Not after everything they did to me." "Emma, you've been through a lot," Mike said gently. "You need to rest and recover." She shook her head stubbornly. "No, I need to do something. I can't let them get away with this." I exchanged a look with Mike, both of us recognizing the determination in her eyes. "Okay," I said finally. "But you need to be careful. Stay close to us, and if things get dangerous, you get out of there. Understood?" Emma nodded, her expression resolute. "Understood." We spent the rest of the day preparing for our plan. We gathered more evidence, photocopying key pages from the journal and organizing them into a dossier. We made contact with a local journalist, someone we could trust to handle the information responsibly. As night fell, the cabin was filled with a tense energy. We were about to take a monumental risk, one that could either bring the Andersons to justice or end in our deaths. But there was no turning back now. "Are we ready?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. Mike nodded, his eyes fierce with determination. "We're ready." Emma looked at us, her eyes reflecting the same resolve. "Let's do this." We left the cabin under the cover of darkness, our hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The drive back to the neighborhood was tense, each passing moment bringing us closer to the confrontation we had been preparing for. We parked a few blocks away, slipping through the shadows towards the Andersons' house. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Plant the evidence where it would be found, then draw the Andersons out into the open. "Remember," Mike whispered as we crouched behind a hedge. "We need to make it look convincing. They have to believe we're vulnerable." I nodded, my grip tightening on the flashlight in my hand. "Let's get this over with." We moved quickly, planting the dossier in a location we knew would be discovered. Then we waited, every second stretching into an eternity. It didn't take long. The Andersons were nothing if not vigilant. Within minutes, we heard the sound of footsteps approaching, their pace quick and purposeful. "Now," Mike whispered, and we stepped out from our hiding place, making sure to be seen. The reaction was immediate. Mr. Anderson's eyes locked onto us, his expression a mask of fury. "You!" he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "What have you done?" "Exposing you," Mike said, his voice steady. "Your reign of terror ends tonight." Mr. Anderson's lips curled into a snarl, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Fools. You have no idea what you're up against." "We know enough," I said, stepping forward. "You're vulnerable to sunlight, and now everyone will know what you are." A cold smile spread across Mr. Anderson's face. "Do you really think you can stop us? You're nothing but insects to be crushed." He moved with blinding speed, but we were ready. Mike raised a flare gun, firing it into the air. The bright light illuminated the night, casting long shadows and bathing the area in a harsh, unrelenting glow. Mr. Anderson recoiled, his skin beginning to blister and smoke. "No," he screamed, his voice a mixture of pain and rage. The commotion drew the attention of the other Andersons, who emerged from the house, their eyes glowing with fury. But the sunlight was their undoing. They stumbled and writhed, unable to withstand the harsh rays. "Now!" Mike shouted, and we moved in, using every weapon at our disposal. The battle was fierce and chaotic, but the sunlight weakened them, giving us the advantage we needed. As the first light of dawn began to break, the Andersons lay defeated, their bodies crumbling to dust. The air was filled with the smell of decay and the lingering echoes of their screams. We stood there, breathing heavily, our bodies bruised and battered but victorious. The nightmare was over. The Andersons' reign of terror had finally come to an end. Emma approached us, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're gone." Mike nodded, a weary smile spreading across his face. "We did it?" he echoed. "It's finally over." As the sun rose higher, casting its warm light over the neighborhood, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The darkness had been vanquished, and a new day was dawning. We had faced our fears, fought back against the monsters, and emerged victorious. But as we stood there, the dust settling around us, I knew that our fight was far from over. There were other Andersons out there, other nests of darkness waiting to be uncovered, and we would be ready. For now, though, we took a moment to breathe, to savor the victory we had fought so hard to achieve. The discovery of the Andersons' weakness had been the key, and we had used it to turn the tide. As we made our way back to the cabin, the weight of the journal in my backpack felt lighter somehow. It was a symbol of our triumph, a testament to the power of knowledge and determination. We had discovered the truth, and in doing so, we had saved countless lives. The Andersons were gone, and the neighborhood was safe once more. And as the sun continued to rise, casting its golden light over the world, I knew that we had done the right thing. We had fought back against the darkness and won. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist, transforming the familiar suburban landscape into something dark and foreboding. As the last rays of daylight disappeared, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The night had always been unsettling since I discovered the truth about the Andersons, but tonight was different. Tonight, we were the hunters. Mike and I stood outside the cabin, our makeshift arsenal spread out on the hood of his car. Silver knives, wooden stakes, bottles of holy water, and a couple of crossbows with silver-tipped arrows. It felt surreal, like we were characters in a horror movie rather than two ordinary people preparing to take on a nest of vampires. "You ready for this, Jack?" Mike asked, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying a flicker of doubt. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, picking up a crossbow and testing its weight. "We've been planning this for weeks. It's time to put that plan into action." Emma emerged from the cabin, her face pale but determined. "I want to come with you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I can't just sit here and do nothing." Mike shook his head firmly. "It's too dangerous, Emma. You've been through enough already. We need you to stay here and be safe." She set her jaw, her eyes flashing with defiance. "I can help. I know the layout of the house, the places they might hide. You need me." I exchanged a look with Mike, recognizing the same conflict in his eyes that I felt in my own. We didn't want to put Emma in danger, but she was right. Her knowledge could be invaluable. "All right," I said finally. "But you stay close to us and follow our lead. No taking unnecessary risks." Emma nodded, her expression resolute. "I understand. Let's end this." We loaded the weapons into the car, the weight of what we were about to do pressing down on us. The drive back to the neighborhood was tense, each passing mile bringing us closer to the showdown we had been preparing for. As we parked a few blocks away from the Andersons' house, the darkness seemed to close in around us. The street was eerily quiet, the usual nighttime sounds of the suburb conspicuously absent. "Remember," Mike said, his voice low, "we stick to the plan. We move in quickly, take them by surprise, and eliminate them one by one. No hesitation." We nodded in unison, the gravity of the situation sinking in. This was it. The hunt had begun. We moved through the shadows, our footsteps silent on the pavement. The Andersons' house loomed ahead, its darkened windows like empty eyes watching our approach. I felt a chill run down my spine but pushed it aside. There was no room for fear now. As we reached the house, Mike signaled for us to split up. He and Emma would take the front entrance while I would circle around to the back. We had to surround them, leave no avenue for escape. I crept through the backyard, the tall grass rustling softly around me. The back door was slightly ajar, a small mercy that saved me the trouble of forcing it open. I slipped inside, the familiar metallic scent of blood and decay assaulting my senses. The house was dark and silent, but I could feel the presence of the Andersons. They were here, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. I gripped my crossbow tightly, my heart pounding in my chest. As I moved through the house, every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. I reached the basement stairs and paused, listening. Faint sounds drifted up from below, whispers, the rustle of movement. I descended the stairs slowly, my eyes straining to see in the dim light. The basement was, as I remembered it, filled with old furniture, broken appliances, and the cages. Most of the cages were empty now, but one was not. A figure lay slumped inside, motionless. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure stirred, lifting its head weakly. It was a man, his face gaunt and pale. Who are you?" he croaked. "I'm here to help," I said, moving closer. "Can you walk?" He shook his head slowly. "Too weak. They've been feeding on me for days." I felt a surge of anger and determination. "Hang in there. We'll get you out of here." As I turned to leave, a cold voice cut through the darkness. "Going somewhere, Jack?" I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Mr. Anderson stood at the foot of the stairs, his pale face twisted into a cruel smile. "Did you really think you could sneak into my house and get away with it?" I raised my crossbow, aiming it at his chest. "It's over, Anderson. We're taking you down." He laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. "You think a few pieces of silver and some holy water are going to stop me? You have no idea what you're up against." Before I could react, he moved with blinding speed, knocking the crossbow from my hands and pinning me against the wall. His strength was overwhelming, his grip like iron. "Mike!" I shouted, struggling to break free. "Emma, help!" Footsteps thundered down the stairs, and I saw Mike and Emma burst into the basement, weapons at the ready. Mr. Anderson turned to face them, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Welcome to the party," he sneered. "I was just about to start without you." Mike fired a silver-tipped arrow, but Mr. Anderson moved faster than I could follow, dodging the projectile with ease. He lunged at Mike, but Emma stepped in, swinging a silver knife with all her strength. The blade sliced through Mr. Anderson's arm, and he let out a roar of pain, recoiling from the searing touch of the silver. I seized the moment to grab my crossbow and fire a bolt into his chest. He staggered back, clutching at the wound, his eyes blazing with fury. "You'll pay for that," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. But we didn't give him a chance to recover. Mike and Emma moved in, attacking from both sides. I fired another bolt, aiming for his heart. The bolt struck true, and Mr. Anderson let out a strangled cry, collapsing to the floor in a heap. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking. Is he dead?" Mike knelt beside the body, checking for any signs of life. "He's dead," he confirmed, his voice filled with relief. "But we're not done yet. The others are still here." We moved quickly, searching the house room by room. The remaining Andersons were no match for us, weakened by the sunlight and caught off guard by our attack. One by one we took them down, our weapons striking true. As the last of the Andersons fell, the house seemed to grow quieter, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. We stood there, breathing heavily, our bodies bruised and battered, but victorious. "It's over," Mike said, his voice filled with disbelief. "We did it." Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. We really did it. We made our way back to the basement, freeing the man from the cage and helping him upstairs. He was weak, but alive, and for that I was grateful. As we emerged into the cool night air, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The Andersons were gone, their reign of terror finally ended. But as we walked away from the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that our fight was far from over. There were other Andersons out there, other nests of darkness waiting to be uncovered, and we would be ready. For now, though, we took a moment to breathe, to savor the victory we had fought so hard to achieve. The hunt had begun, and we had emerged victorious. The neighborhood felt eerily quiet the morning after our battle with the Andersons. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the streets and illuminating the aftermath of our fight. It was a surreal feeling, walking through the once menacing suburban streets now seemingly purged of their terror. But despite our victory, an unsettling thought nagged at the back of my mind. This wasn't over. There were more out there, lurking in the shadows. Mike and I were back at the cabin, a temporary haven in the midst of our ongoing war. We sat at the makeshift war room table, a map of the city spread out before us. Emma was in the corner, still pale but recovering, drinking a cup of hot tea. Her presence was a reminder of what we were fighting for, survival and the reclamation of our peace. "We need to figure out our next move," Mike said, his voice breaking the silence. "We can't just sit around and wait for them to come to us." I nodded, tracing a finger along the map. The Andersons were just one nest. There are more out there, and we need to find them before they regroup. Emma looked up from her tea, her eyes sharp and determined. "But how do we find them? The Andersons kept their activities well hidden. There must be others like them." Mike leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. "We need more information, and that means we might need help. There must be others who know about these things, who can help us track them down." I glanced at Emma, remembering the fear in her eyes when we first rescued her. "Do you know anyone who might have information? Anyone who might have dealt with them before?" Emma shook her head. "No, I don't. But there is someone I heard about while I was captive. Another group. They called themselves the Order of the Sun. Apparently, they've been hunting vampires for generations." "The Order of the Sun." Mike repeated, his eyes narrowing. Do you know how to find them? Emma hesitated. I only heard rumors. They operate in the shadows, much like the vampires they hunt. But there's one place where they might have a presence, a small town called Brookhaven, about 50 miles from here. I studied the map, finding Brookhaven and marking it with a pen. It's a lead. We should check it out. If they are hunters like us, they might have the resources and knowledge we need. Mike nodded. It's worth a shot. We should head out as soon as possible. The longer we wait, the more time the vampires have to regroup. As we packed our gear and prepared to leave, a sense of urgency hung in the air. The fight was far from over, and we needed allies if we were going to have any chance of winning. The drive to Brookhaven was tense but uneventful. We arrived just as the sun was setting. The town bathed in a warm, golden light that belied the darkness we knew lurked beneath the surface. We parked on the outskirts and made our way to the town center, where a quaint, old-fashioned library stood, its windows glowing with a soft, inviting light. Maybe we can find some information here, I suggested, leading the way inside. The librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes, greeted us with a warm smile. Good evening. How can I help you folks today? Mike stepped forward, his expression serious. We're looking for information on a group called the Order of the Sun. Have you ever heard of them? The librarian's smile faltered slightly, a flicker of recognition passing through her eyes. The Order of the Sun, you say? That's an old name, one I haven't heard in many years. Why are you looking for them? We're hunting vampires, Emma said bluntly, her voice steady, and we need their help. The librarian's eyes widened and she glanced around the library, ensuring no one else was listening. Follow me, she whispered, leading us to a back room filled with old books and dusty shelves. Once inside, she closed the door and turned to face us, her expression grave. The Order of the Sun is real, but they are secretive for a reason. They don't trust outsiders easily, and they won't reveal themselves unless they believe you are truly on their side. Mike nodded. We understand, we're not looking to expose them. We just need their help to stop the vampires. The librarian studied us for a long moment before sighing. There is a man in town who might be able to help you. His name is Samuel. He runs the old bookstore on Main Street. Tell him I sent you, and that you seek the light. Thank you, I said sincerely. We appreciate your help. The librarian nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and worry. Be careful. The Order has many enemies, and the vampires are always watching. We left the library and made our way to the bookstore, the streets of Brookhaven quiet and empty. The bookstore was a charming, old-fashioned shop with wooden shelves and a faint smell of musty paper. Samuel, a tall man with graying hair and piercing blue eyes, stood behind the counter, organizing a stack of books. Good evening, he greeted us, his voice warm but guarded. Can I help you find something? The librarian sent us, Mike said quietly. We seek the light. Samuel's eyes sharpened, and he glanced around the shop before motioning for us to follow him. He led us to a back room, much like the one in the library, and closed the door behind us. You know about the Order, Samuel said, his tone more serious now. Why are you here? We're hunting vampires, I explained. We recently took down a nest, but we know there are more out there. We need help. Information, resources, anything you can provide. Samuel studied us for a long moment before nodding. The Order of the Sun has been fighting vampires for centuries. We have knowledge and resources that can help you, but joining our cause comes with great risk. Once you are part of the Order, there is no turning back. We understand the risks, Emma said, her voice firm. We've already faced them. We're willing to do whatever it takes to stop the vampires. Samuel nodded again, a hint of respect in his eyes. Very well, follow me. He led us through a hidden door in the back of the room, revealing a staircase that descended into a dimly lit basement. The basement was filled with ancient books, weapons, and various artifacts, a treasure trove of knowledge and tools for vampire hunters. This is our sanctuary, Samuel explained. The heart of the Order. Here we store our knowledge and prepare for the fight. We have records of every vampire nest we've encountered, every battle we've fought. Mike's eyes widened as he took in the sight. This is incredible. With your help, we can track down and eliminate the remaining nests. Samuel nodded. But you must understand, the Order is small. We have been diminished over the years, our numbers dwindling as the vampires grow stronger. We cannot fight this war alone. Then we'll fight together, I said, determination hardening my voice. We'll combine our resources and knowledge. Together, we can turn the tide. Samuel studied us for a long moment before a faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Very well. Welcome to the Order of the Sun. Over the next few days, we immersed ourselves in the Order's knowledge. We pored over ancient texts and detailed maps, learning everything we could about the vampires and their weaknesses. Samuel and the other members of the Order, few though they were, trained us in advanced combat techniques and the use of their specialized weapons. One evening, as we gathered around a large map of the region, Samuel pointed to a location circled in red. "This is our next target," he said. "A vampire nest in the hills just outside of town. It's heavily fortified and they have a leader, one of the oldest and most powerful vampires we've ever encountered." "What's the plan?" Mike asked, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We'll strike at dawn," Samuel replied. "The sunlight will be our greatest advantage. We need to move quickly and decisively, take out their leader, and dismantle the nest before they have a chance to regroup." Emma nodded, her expression resolute. "We're ready. We've come this far and we're not backing down now." As we made our final preparations, a sense of camaraderie began to build among us. We were no longer just a group of individuals fighting for survival. We were a team united by a common goal and a shared determination to rid the world of the vampire scourge. The night before the attack, Samuel gathered us together. "Remember, this fight is bigger than any one of us. We are part of a legacy, a long line of hunters who have dedicated their lives to this cause. We fight for those who cannot, for the victims who have suffered, and for the future generations who deserve to live without fear." We nodded, the weight of his words settling over us. This was our mission, our purpose, and we would see it through to the end. As the first light of dawn began to break, we moved out, our weapons at the ready. The hills outside Brookhaven were shrouded in mist, the air cool and crisp. We approached the vampire nest with a mixture of caution and determination, every step bringing us closer to the final confrontation. Samuel signaled for us to halt as we reached the entrance to the nest, a dark, foreboding cave that seemed to exude an aura of malevolence. "This is it," he whispered. "Stay focused, stay together, and remember, sunlight is our greatest ally." We nodded, our grips tightening on our weapons. With a deep breath, we moved forward, entering the darkness of the cave. The interior was a labyrinth of twisting tunnels and hidden chambers, the walls lined with ancient carvings and symbols. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat. As we moved deeper into the nest, we encountered the first of the vampires. They attacked with a ferocity born of desperation, but we were ready. Our weapons struck true, and the vampires fell one by one, their bodies disintegrating into dust. We pressed on, our progress marked by the growing light of dawn filtering through the cave entrance. The final chamber lay ahead, a large cavernous space filled with the sounds of movement and whispers. Samuel raised a hand, signaling for us to stop. "This is it," he said quietly. "The leader will be in there. We need to strike quickly and take him out before he can react." We nodded, our hearts pounding with anticipation. With a final deep breath, we charged into the chamber, our weapons at the ready. The leader of the vampires was a tall, imposing figure, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. He turned to face us, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Fools," he hissed. "You think you can defeat me? I have lived for centuries. I am invincible." But we were undeterred. With a coordinated effort, we attacked, our weapons flashing in the dim light. The battle was fierce and chaotic, but we fought with a determination that could not be quelled. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the cave entrance, the leader let out a roar of pain, his skin blistering and smoking. We pressed our advantage, striking with everything we had. With a final, desperate lunge, I drove a silver-tipped stake into his heart. The leader let out a strangled cry, his body convulsing before crumbling to dust. Silence fell over the chamber as we stood there, breathing heavily, our bodies bruised and battered but victorious. The leader was dead, and the nest had been dismantled. Samuel stepped forward, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and pride. "We did it," he said quietly. "The nest is destroyed." We nodded, a sense of accomplishment washing over us. We had fought together, united by a common goal, and we had emerged victorious. As we made our way out of the cave, the morning light bathed the hills in a warm, golden glow. The darkness had been vanquished and a new day had dawned. But we knew that our fight was far from over. There were other nests out there, other vampires lurking in the shadows, and we would be ready. For now, though, we took a moment to breathe, to savor the victory we had fought so hard to achieve. The hunt had begun, and we had found unlikely allies in the Order of the Sun. Together, we would continue the fight, bringing light to the darkest corners of the world. And as the sun rose higher, casting its golden light over the hills, we knew that we were ready for whatever came next. The battle. The plan was set, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The Order of the Sun had provided us with the knowledge and resources we needed, but now it was time to put everything to the test. We were about to face one of the oldest and most powerful vampire nests in the region, and there was no room for error. Samuel gathered us in the dimly lit basement of the Order's headquarters. Maps and diagrams covered the walls, detailing the layout of the vampire nest and our plan of attack. The air was thick with tension, and the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on all of us. "Listen up," Samuel began, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've identified the leader of this nest, an ancient vampire known as Lucius. He's incredibly powerful, but he's also vulnerable during the day. Our best chance of taking him down is during daylight hours when his strength is diminished." Mike nodded, his expression grim. "We've been preparing for this. We know their weaknesses and we have the element of surprise. We need to hit them hard and fast." Emma, still pale but resolute, stepped forward. "I've been in that nest. I know its layout. There's a hidden entrance on the east side that we can use to get in undetected." Samuel glanced at Emma, his eyes filled with respect. "Your knowledge will be invaluable, Emma. We'll split into 2 teams. Team A will enter through the hidden entrance and neutralize any guards. Team B will create a diversion at the main entrance to draw their attention." I looked around at the faces of my comrades, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. We had come so far, and now it was time to finish what we started. "We've got this," I said, trying to bolster my own confidence as much as theirs. "We stick to the plan, watch each other's backs, and we'll make it through." As the first light of dawn began to break, we moved out, our weapons and gear packed and ready. The drive to the vampire nest was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. The nest was located in an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town, a decaying relic of a bygone era. Its Gothic architecture loomed ominously against the early morning sky. We parked a safe distance away and made our final preparations. Samuel handed out earpieces so we could communicate during the operation. "Stay in contact," he instructed. "If anything goes wrong, we regroup and reassess. No one gets left behind." With that, we split into our designated teams. I was with Team A, along with Mike, Emma, and 2 other members of the Order. Thomas, a burly man with a scarred face, and Rebecca, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense attitude. We approached the hidden entrance, a concealed door covered in ivy and moss. Emma led the way, using her knowledge of the nest to guide us through the narrow, winding passageways. The air was damp and musty, the scent of decay growing stronger as we moved deeper into the mansion. Every creak and groan of the old building set my nerves on edge. "We're close," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "The guard room is just ahead." We paused at a corner, peeking around to see two vampires standing guard. They were talking in low voices, unaware of our presence. Mike signaled for us to move into position, and we readied our weapons. On his signal, we sprang into action. Mike and Thomas took down one guard with crossbows, the silver-tipped bolt striking true. Emma and I engaged the second guard, our silver knives flashing in the dim light. The fight was quick and brutal, and soon both guards lay dead at our feet. "Good work," Mike said, his voice low and urgent. "Let's keep moving." We pressed on, making our way through the twisting corridors. The sounds of battle echoed faintly from the main entrance, where Team B was creating their diversion. Our objective was clear: find Lucius and end him. As we reached the main chamber, the sense of dread grew stronger. The room was vast, filled with old furniture and ancient tapestries. In the center stood Lucius, an imposing figure with pale skin and glowing red eyes. He turned to face us, a cruel smile spreading across his lips. "So the hunters have come to play," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're too late. This nest will rise again, stronger than ever." "We'll see about that," Mike retorted, stepping forward with his crossbow aimed at Lucius. "This ends now." Lucius laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Foolish mortals, you have no idea what you're up against." With blinding speed, Lucius lunged at Mike, knocking him to the ground. The rest of us sprang into action, attacking from all sides. The fight was chaotic, a blur of silver and fangs, but we fought with everything we had. Emma and I managed to flank Lucius, striking at his sides with our knives. He roared in pain, his movements becoming more erratic. Thomas and Rebecca kept him at bay with their crossbows, each shot weakening him further. "Keep at it," Mike shouted, struggling to his feet. "We're wearing him down," Lucius snarled, his eyes blazing with fury. "You will all die for this." He swung at me, but I ducked just in time, feeling the rush of air as his claws narrowly missed my head. "Not today," I muttered, driving my knife into his side. Lucius howled in agony, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. Suddenly, Lucius leaped backward, landing near an old, ornate mirror. "You may have won this battle," he hissed, "but the war is far from over." Before we could react, he smashed the mirror with his fist, and a swirling vortex of darkness began to form. Lucius stepped into the vortex, his body dissolving into shadow. "No!" Mike shouted, firing a bolt into the vortex, but it was too late. Lucius was gone, leaving us standing in the ruined chamber. For a moment we were silent, the adrenaline still coursing through our veins. Then Samuel's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Team A, report. What's your status?" Mike took a deep breath, his voice steady but filled with frustration. "Lucius escaped. He used some kind of portal. We weren't able to stop him." There was a pause on the other end before Samuel responded. "Understood. Secure the area and regroup. We need to assess the situation and plan our next move." As we began to secure the chamber, I felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. We had taken down the nest, but the leader had escaped. The battle was over, but the war was indeed far from won. Back at the Order's headquarters, we regrouped to debrief and plan our next steps. Samuel's expression was grim, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "We've dealt a significant blow to the vampires today," he said. "Lucius may have escaped, but he's weakened and his nest is destroyed. We can't let up now." "We need to find out where he went," Mike said, his determination unwavering. "If he's planning something bigger, we need to be ready." Emma nodded. "I overheard something while I was captive. Lucius mentioned a place called Black Hollow. It's an old abandoned village deep in the forest. It's rumored to be a gathering place for powerful vampires." Samuel's eyes widened. "Black Hollow. That makes sense. It's a place steeped in dark history and magic. If Lucius is regrouping, that's where he'll go." "Then that's our next target," I said, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. We'll gather our forces and head to Black Hollow. This time we'll finish what we started. The days that followed were filled with intense preparation. We trained rigorously, honing our skills and studying the maps and intel we had gathered. The Order of the Sun provided us with additional resources and support, bolstering our ranks with seasoned hunters. On the morning of the operation, we stood ready, our gear packed and our hearts steeled for the battle ahead. Samuel addressed us one last time before we set out. Today, we face a great evil, but we do not face it alone. We are united in our cause, and we will not falter. Remember why we fight: for the innocents who have suffered, for those who cannot defend themselves, and for a future free from fear. We nodded, a sense of unity and determination binding us together. We were not just hunters, we were a family, forged in the fires of battle and bound by our shared purpose. The journey to Black Hollow was long and arduous, the dense forest growing darker and more foreboding as we neared our destination. The village itself was a haunting sight, its crumbling buildings and twisted trees casting eerie shadows in the dim light. We approached with caution, our senses on high alert. The air was thick with the scent of decay and dark magic, a tangible reminder of the evil that lurked within. "Stay together," Mike whispered, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "We don't know what traps they might have set." We moved as one, our weapons at the ready. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Every step brought us closer to the heart of the darkness. As we reached the center of the village, we found Lucius waiting for us. He stood in the center of a decaying courtyard flanked by a dozen vampires. His eyes gleamed with malice, and his smile was a twisted mockery of humanity. "Welcome, hunters," Lucius said, his voice echoing through the empty village. "I must commend your bravery, coming all this way to face me again. It's almost admirable." "We're not here for compliments," Mike replied, his voice steady. "We're here to end you, once and for all." Lucius laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent shivers down my spine. "End me? You're welcome to try." Without another word, the battle began. We charged forward, our weapons flashing in the dim light. The vampires moved with terrifying speed, but we were prepared. Silver knives clashed against claws and fangs, crossbow bolts flew through the air, and holy water sizzled on undead flesh. The courtyard became a chaotic melee, filled with the sounds of battle and the acrid smell of burning vampire flesh. I found myself facing a vampire, its eyes glowing with hunger. It lunged at me, but I sidestepped and drove my silver knife into its chest. The creature let out a shriek and disintegrated into dust. Emma fought beside me, her movements fluid and precise. She dispatched one vampire after another, her face a mask of determination. "We're making progress," she shouted over the din. "Keep pushing forward." Mike and Samuel fought their way toward Lucius, their combined attacks relentless. But Lucius was no ordinary vampire. He moved with supernatural speed, deflecting their blows with ease. "You think you can defeat me?" he sneered. "You're nothing but insects." "We'll see about that," Mike growled, firing a crossbow bolt that grazed Lucius's arm. The vampire leader hissed in pain, his eyes narrowing with fury. I moved to join them, my heart pounding. We had to take Lucius down, or everything we'd fought for would be in vain. As I neared, Lucius lunged at Samuel, his claws aiming for the hunter's throat. "Samuel, look out!" I shouted, but it was too late. Lucius's claws raked across Samuel's chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. "No!" I screamed, rushing to Samuel's side. He was alive, but barely. Blood poured from his wounds, and his breathing was labored. "Focus, Jack," Mike yelled, his voice cutting through my panic. "We need to finish this." I nodded, my grief fueling my determination. I picked up Samuel's fallen crossbow and took aim at Lucius. "This is for Samuel," I muttered, releasing the bolt. The bolt struck Lucius in the shoulder, and he roared in pain, staggering back. Mike seized the opportunity, driving his silver knife into Lucius's side. The vampire leader howled, his eyes blazing with fury and desperation. "Enough!" Lucius screamed, his voice filled with rage. "I will not be defeated by mere humans!" With a burst of speed, he lunged at me, his claws outstretched. I dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding his attack. Mike and Emma moved to flank him, their weapons ready. "We've got him on the ropes!" Emma shouted. "Don't let up!" We pressed our advantage, attacking Lucius from all sides. He fought back with savage ferocity, but we were relentless. Slowly, we wore him down, our attacks finding their mark. Finally, with a desperate cry, Lucius fell to his knees, his body trembling. This cannot be," he gasped, his voice filled with disbelief. "It's over, Lucius," Mike said, his voice hard. "You've terrorized enough people. This ends now." With a final, coordinated strike, we drove our silver knives into Lucius's heart. He let out one last agonized scream before his body crumbled to dust. The courtyard fell silent, the only sound our ragged breathing. We had done it. Lucius was dead and the nest was destroyed. I rushed back to Samuel's side, my heart heavy with fear. "Samuel, hang on, we'll get you out of here." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with pain but also a flicker of pride. You did it," he whispered. "You finished what we started." "Don't talk like that," I said, my voice breaking. "We're getting you help. You're going to be okay." But deep down, I knew the truth. Samuel's wounds were too severe. He had given everything for this fight, and now it was up to us to carry on his legacy. As we carried Samuel back to the Order's headquarters, the weight of our victory and our loss settled over us. We had struck a major blow against the vampires, but the cost had been high. Samuel, our leader and mentor, had fallen. The members of the Order greeted us with somber faces, their joy at our victory tempered by the sight of Samuel's injuries. We laid him on a makeshift bed, and the Order's healer began to work, but it was clear that the prognosis was grim. Samuel motioned for Mike and me to come closer. "Listen to me," he said, his voice weak but determined. "You've done well, but the fight is not over. There are more like Lucius out there, more nests to destroy. We'll carry on. Samuel," Mike said, his voice choked with emotion, "we'll honor your legacy." Samuel nodded, his eyes closing as he let out a sigh. "Good. Remember, you are not alone. The Order will always stand with you." With those final words, Samuel's body went still, and he took his last breath. We stood there in silence, grief washing over us like a tidal wave. We had won the battle, but the cost had been great. As the members of the Order gathered to pay their respects, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Emma, her eyes filled with determination. "We'll keep fighting," she said, her voice steady. "For Samuel, for all the people we've lost. We won't let their sacrifices be in vain." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "We'll find every last one of them. We'll destroy their nests one by one until there are none left." Mike stepped forward, his expression fierce. "And we'll do it together. The Order of the Sun is more than just a group of hunters. We're a family, and together, we're unstoppable." In the days that followed, we mourned Samuel's loss, but we also prepared for the battles to come. We trained harder, studied more, and forged new alliances. The Order of the Sun grew stronger, fueled by our shared determination and the memory of those we had lost. As we stood together, ready to face the darkness once more, I knew that we were prepared for whatever came next. The vampires might be powerful, but they had never faced a force like us. We were hunters. We were the Order of the Sun, and we would not rest until every last vampire was destroyed. The grief from Samuel's death weighed heavily on all of us, but it also solidified our resolve. We had struck a major blow against the vampires, but the fight was far from over. We needed a new plan, one that would allow us to take down the remaining nests and bring an end to their reign of terror once and for all. The Order's headquarters buzzed with activity as we gathered in the main room. Maps, documents, and weapons were spread out on the large wooden table at the center, evidence of the intense preparation underway. The air was thick with determination and a sense of urgency. Mike stood at the head of the table, his expression focused and intense. "All right, everyone. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get to it. Our main objective is to locate and destroy the remaining vampire nests. We know they're out there, and we can't give them a chance to regroup." Emma nodded, her face set with determination. "We need to be methodical about this. We can't afford any mistakes. We need to gather intel, identify the nests, and strike hard and fast." One of the Order members, a young man named Alex, stepped forward. "I've been working on tracking down possible nest locations. There are a few leads we can follow up on, but we need more eyes and ears on the ground." Rebecca, another experienced hunter, spoke up. "We can use our network. We have contacts in several towns and cities. If we mobilize them, we can cover more ground and gather information more quickly." Mike nodded, glancing at the map spread out before us. "Good. We'll split into teams and start investigating these leads. But we need to be careful. The vampires will be on high alert after what happened to Lucius. They won't go down easily." I stepped forward, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. "We also need to find a way to disrupt their communication. If we can cut off their ability to coordinate, we'll have a better chance of taking them down." Alex pointed to a spot on the map. "There's a central hub they use to communicate. It's heavily guarded, but if we can take it out, it'll be a major blow to their operations." Mike's eyes gleamed with determination. "Then that's our first target. We take out their communication hub and then we hit the nests. We'll need a solid plan and precise execution." Rebecca looked around the room, her gaze settling on each of us in turn. "We're ready for this. We've trained, we've fought, and we've lost. But we're still here, and we're not going to stop until the job is done." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. We were in this together, and we were prepared to do whatever it took to see it through. Mike broke the silence, his voice steady. "All right, let's get to work. We have a lot to do, and not much time to do it." Over the next few days, the headquarters was a hive of activity. Teams were formed, plans were drawn up, and preparations were made. The sense of urgency was palpable, and every moment was dedicated to ensuring our success. Emma and I were assigned to the team tasked with taking out the communication hub. It was a critical mission, and the stakes couldn't be higher. If we failed, the vampires would be able to regroup and retaliate. The night before the operation, we gathered in a small room to go over the plan one last time. Mike, Emma, Alex, and I huddled around a detailed map of the hub. "Remember," Mike said, his voice low but firm, "we need to move quickly and efficiently. Our primary objective is to destroy their communication systems. If we encounter resistance, we neutralize it, but our main focus is the hub." Alex nodded, pointing to the entrance. "We'll go in through here. It's the least guarded entry point. Once inside, we split into two teams. Mike and I will take the upper levels, while Jack and Emma handle the basement." I glanced at Emma, who gave me a determined nod. We had become a formidable team, and I knew we could rely on each other. "Timing is crucial," Mike continued. "We need to be in and out before they have a chance to mount a counterattack. We synchronize our watches and move as one." We all nodded in agreement, the gravity of the mission settling over us. There was no room for error. As we prepared to leave, Mike pulled me aside. "Jack, I want you to know that I trust you. You've come a long way since this all started, and you've proven yourself time and time again. We're going to get through this." I met his gaze, feeling a surge of gratitude and determination. "Thanks, Mike. I won't let you down." The drive to the hub was tense, each of us lost in our thoughts. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. As we approached the hub, we parked a safe distance away and moved in on foot. The building loomed ahead, a dark and foreboding structure that seemed to pulse with malevolence. We crept through the shadows, our movements silent and precise. We reached the entrance without incident, and Alex used his skills to disable the security system. The door clicked open, and we slipped inside. The interior was a maze of corridors and rooms, the air thick with the scent of decay. We moved quickly and quietly, each step bringing us closer to our objective. Mike and Alex split off, heading for the upper levels, while Emma and I descended into the basement. The air grew colder as we moved deeper into the building, and the sense of foreboding intensified. "Stay sharp," Emma whispered, her eyes scanning the darkness ahead. "We don't know what we're going to find down here." I nodded, gripping my weapon tightly. The basement was a labyrinth of pipes and machinery, the dim light casting eerie shadows on the walls. We moved cautiously, our senses on high alert. Every creak and groan of the building set my nerves on edge. Suddenly, a figure stepped out of the shadows, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Vampire!" Emma shouted, raising her weapon. I reacted instinctively, firing a silver-tipped bolt into the vampire's chest. It let out a strangled cry and disintegrated into dust. "Nice shot," Emma said, her voice filled with tension. "But we need to keep moving. There are bound to be more." We continued through the basement, encountering several more vampires along the way. Each encounter was a fierce battle, but we fought with a determination born of necessity. Finally, we reached the central communication room. The air was thick with the hum of machinery, and the walls were lined with monitors and equipment. "There it is," Emma said, her eyes narrowing. "We need to destroy all of this." We set to work, planting explosives on the key systems. The tension was palpable, each second stretching into eternity. As we finished setting the charges, a voice echoed through the room. "You think you can stop us?" A vampire hissed, stepping out of the shadows. "You're too late. Our plans are already in motion." I raised my weapon, my heart pounding. "We'll see about that." The vampire lunged at us, but Emma and I fought back with everything we had. The battle was intense, the vampire's strength and speed almost overwhelming. But we had come too far to fail now. With a final, coordinated effort, we managed to drive our silver knives into the vampire's heart. It let out a blood-curdling scream before collapsing into dust. "Let's get out of here," Emma said, her voice filled with urgency. "The charges are set. We need to move." We sprinted back through the basement, our footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. As we reached the entrance, we rendezvoused with Mike and Alex. "Charges set?" Mike asked, his eyes sharp. "Everything's ready," I confirmed. "We need to move now." We raced out of the building, the tension mounting with each step. As we reached a safe distance, we took cover and detonated the charges. The explosion rocked the night, a deafening roar that shattered the silence. The building crumbled, flames licking at the sky. We watched as the communication hub was reduced to rubble, the flames casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The vampire's ability to coordinate had been crippled, and we had struck a significant blow to their operations. As the flames died down, we regrouped, our faces streaked with dirt and sweat but filled with a sense of accomplishment. "We did it," Alex said, his voice filled with relief. "The hub is destroyed." Mike nodded, his expression grim but determined. "This is just the beginning. We've disrupted their communication, but we need to keep up the pressure. We'll track down the remaining nests and finish what we started." Emma looked around at the faces of her comrades, her eyes filled with determination. "We'll fight them every step of the way. For Samuel, for everyone we've lost, we won't stop until they're all gone." As we made our way back to the Order's headquarters, a sense of unity and resolve settled over us. We had faced incredible odds and emerged victorious, but the fight was far from over. The battle had begun, and we were ready for whatever came next. Together we would continue to fight, bringing light to the darkest corners of the world and ensuring that the vampire's reign of terror would come to an end. The stakes had never been higher. With the vampire communication hub destroyed and Lucius, the ancient vampire leader, vanquished, the tide of the war had turned in our favor. However, we knew that the remaining vampire nests would not take this defeat lightly. they would be desperate. And a cornered beast is always the most dangerous. Samuel's loss had been a significant blow to the Order, but it had also united us with a renewed sense of purpose. We gathered in the war room once again, the atmosphere charged with a mixture of anticipation and grim determination. Mike stood at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the room. We've dealt a major blow to their operations, but this is far from over. Our intel suggests that the remaining nests are regrouping and planning a counterattack. We need to strike before they have a chance to coordinate. Emma leaned forward, her eyes sharp. We need to hit them hard and fast, just like before. We can't give them any breathing room. Alex spread out a map on the table, marking several locations. Based on the intel we've gathered, we've identified 3 primary nests. Each one is heavily fortified and commanded by powerful vampires. We'll need to split into teams to take them down simultaneously. I studied the map, feeling the weight of the task ahead. Do we have enough people to cover all 3 nests? We can't afford to spread ourselves too thin. Rebecca, ever the pragmatist, nodded. We've reached out to our contacts and mobilized additional hunters. We'll have enough manpower, but coordination will be key. We need to ensure that each team knows their role and can handle the challenges they'll face. Mike's expression was resolute. We'll form 3 strike teams. Each team will be led by one of us. Emma, you'll take Team A. Alex, you'll lead Team B. I'll handle Team C. Jack, you'll be with me. I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. Let's go over the plan one more time. We spent the next few hours meticulously planning our attack. Each team was assigned specific targets and objectives, and we went over every detail to ensure that there were no surprises. The Order had learned from its past mistakes, and we were determined to leave nothing to chance. As night fell, we made our final preparations. The atmosphere was tense but focused, each of us steeling ourselves for the battle ahead. We knew what was at stake, and there was no room for doubt. Emma approached me, her face set with determination. You ready for this, Jack? I met her gaze, feeling a mixture of fear and resolve. Yeah, we've come too far to back down now. Let's finish this. With a final nod, we moved out, our weapons and gear at the ready. The drive to the vampire nests was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape as we neared our destinations. Team A and Team B split off, heading for their respective targets, while Team C, Mike, Rebecca, a few other hunters, and I, continued towards our objective. The nest we were targeting was located in an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town, a decaying structure that loomed menacingly in the darkness. We're approaching the target, Mike said, his voice low but steady. Everyone stay sharp. We don't know what we're walking into. We parked a safe distance away and moved in on foot, using the cover of darkness to approach the factory. The air was thick with tension, every rustle of leaves and distant sound setting our nerves on edge. We reached the entrance without incident, and Rebecca used her skills to disable the security system. The door creaked open and we slipped inside, our movements silent and precise. The interior of the factory was a maze of rusted machinery and crumbling walls. The air was damp and musty, the scent of decay hanging heavy. We moved cautiously, our senses on high alert. This place gives me the creeps, one of the hunters, a young woman named Sarah, whispered. Stay focused, Mike replied, his voice steady. We're here to do a job. We continued through the factory, encountering several vampires along the way. Each battle was fierce and brutal, but we fought with a determination that could not be quelled. The vampires were desperate, their attacks frenzied, but we held our ground. Finally, we reached the heart of the nest, a large, open chamber filled with makeshift sleeping quarters and feeding areas. At the center stood the nest's leader, a tall, imposing vampire with piercing red eyes. So you've come to die, the vampire leader sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. Not today, Mike retorted, raising his crossbow. We're here to end this. The vampire leader laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. "You think you can stop us? You're nothing but insects." "Let's find out," I said, stepping forward with my weapon ready. The battle erupted in a flurry of movement and violence. The vampire leader was incredibly powerful, his speed and strength almost overwhelming. But we fought with everything we had, our attacks coordinated and relentless. "Keep at it," Mike shouted, firing a bolt that struck the vampire leader in the shoulder. "We're wearing him down!" The vampire leader roared in pain and fury, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You will all die for this!" He lunged at Rebecca, but she dodged to the side, her silver knife flashing in the dim light. "We've got him!" Sarah shouted, driving her weapon into the vampire leader's side. The vampire leader staggered, his movements becoming more erratic. "No, this cannot be," he gasped, his voice filled with disbelief. Mike and I moved in for the final strike, our weapons poised. "This ends now," Mike said, his voice hard with determination. With a coordinated effort, we drove our silver knives into the vampire leader's heart. He let out a final, agonized scream before collapsing into dust. The chamber fell silent, the only sound our ragged breathing. We had done it. The nest was destroyed. Rebecca wiped sweat from her brow, her face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Is everyone all right?" "We're good," I replied, looking around at the others. "We did it." Mike nodded, his expression grim but satisfied. "This is a major victory, but we need to check in with the other teams." We quickly regrouped and contacted Team A and Team B. Both teams reported similar success, their targets eliminated and the nests destroyed. "We've struck a major blow against the vampires," Mike said, his voice filled with pride. "But we can't let up. We need to keep up the pressure and finish this fight." We returned to the Order's headquarters, where we were met with cheers and congratulations. The mood was jubilant, but we knew that this was just one battle in a larger war. As we debriefed and shared our experiences, I felt a sense of camaraderie and unity that I had never felt before. We were more than just a group of hunters. We were a family, bound by our shared purpose and determination. Over the next few days, we continued our efforts, tracking down the remaining nests and eliminating them one by one. Each victory brought us closer to our ultimate goal, a world free from the vampire menace. As the final nest fell, and the last vampire was destroyed, we stood together, our faces filled with a mixture of relief and triumph. We had done it. We had won. Mike addressed the group, his voice filled with emotion. "We've faced incredible odds and made great sacrifices, but we've come out on top. This victory belongs to all of us. We've shown the world that we will not be defeated." Emma stepped forward, her eyes shining with pride. "We've honored Samuel's legacy and the memory of all those we've lost. This is just the beginning. We'll continue to protect the innocent and ensure that the darkness never returns." As we looked around at the faces of our comrades, I felt a sense of fulfillment and purpose. We had fought together, bled together, and triumphed together. The battle was over, but our mission was far from complete. We would remain vigilant, always ready to stand against the darkness. And as the sun rose on a new day, casting its golden light over the landscape, we knew that we were prepared for whatever came next. We were hunters, defenders of the light, and we would never stop fighting. Aftermath. The battle was over. The vampires' nests had been destroyed, and their leaders vanquished. Yet as we stood among the ruins of the final stronghold, a sense of unease settled over me. The victory, while significant, had come at a great cost. Samuel was gone, and many others had fallen in the fight against the darkness. Back at the Order's headquarters, the atmosphere was a mix of relief and sorrow. We had won, but the price had been steep. We gathered in the main hall, where the survivors of the Order and our allies met to debrief and plan the future. Mike, now the de facto leader after Samuel's death, stood at the head of the table. His face was drawn and tired, but his eyes were filled with a steely resolve. "We've done it," he began, his voice carrying through the room. The vampire threat has been neutralized, but we must not become complacent. There are still dangers out there, and we need to stay vigilant. Emma, sitting beside me, nodded in agreement. We've lost a lot, but we've also gained strength from this. We need to honor those who fell by continuing our mission. Rebecca, ever the pragmatist, spoke up next. Our network is still intact and we need to maintain it. We should be ready to respond to any new threats quickly and effectively. Alex, who had proven himself a capable strategist, added, we should also take this time to rebuild and recruit, strengthen our numbers and ensure that we are prepared for anything that comes our way. As the discussions continued, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. From the moment I first discovered the truth about my neighbors to the climactic battle against Lucius, it had been a relentless and harrowing experience. But through it all, we had become a family, bound by our shared purpose and determination. After the meeting, I wandered through the headquarters, lost in thought. The halls were filled with memories of those we had lost and the battles we had fought. I found myself in the training room where I had spent countless hours honing my skills. Emma joined me, her presence a comforting reminder that I wasn't alone. You okay, Jack? She asked, her voice gentle. I sighed, leaning against the wall. Yeah, just processing everything. We've come so far, but it feels like there's still so much to do. She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. It's normal to feel that way. We've been through a lot, and it's going to take time to heal. But we've made a difference, Jack. We've saved lives. I smiled, grateful for her words. Thanks, Emma. I needed to hear that. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her expression filled with determination. We're in this together, remember? We'll face whatever comes next as a team. In the days that followed, we focused on rebuilding and regrouping. The Order's headquarters became a hive of activity as new recruits were trained and old members shared their knowledge and experience. The sense of camaraderie and unity was palpable, a testament to the bonds we had forged in the heat of battle. One evening, Mike called for a gathering in the main hall. As we assembled, I noticed a mix of familiar faces and new ones, all eager and ready to continue the fight against the darkness. Mike stood before us, his presence commanding and reassuring. We've accomplished a great deal, but our work is far from over. The world is a dangerous place, and there will always be threats that we need to address. But we are ready. We are stronger than ever. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the room. We have lost many friends and comrades, but we honor their memory by continuing our mission. We are the Order of the Sun, and we will stand against the darkness, no matter what form it takes. The room erupted in cheers, the sense of resolve and unity filling the air. I felt a surge of pride and determination. We had faced incredible odds and emerged victorious, and now we were ready to face whatever came next. After the meeting, I found myself on the rooftop, gazing out at the city below. The night was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos and violence we had endured. Emma joined me, her presence a comforting anchor. Penny, for your thoughts? She asked, leaning against the railing. I smiled, glancing at her. Just thinking about the future. We've come so far, but there's still so much to do. It's a bit overwhelming. She nodded, her expression contemplative. It is, but we're not alone. We have each other, and we have the Order. We'll face whatever comes our way together. I reached for her hand, grateful for her support. Thanks, Emma. I don't know what I'd do without you. She squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with warmth. We're a team, Jack. We've got this. As we stood there looking out at the city, I felt a sense of peace and determination. The battle had been hard fought, but we had emerged stronger, and with the support of my friends and comrades, I knew we were ready for whatever came next. The weeks passed, and the Order continued to grow and strengthen. New recruits joined our ranks, eager to learn and fight. The sense of unity and purpose was stronger than ever, a testament to the bonds we had forged in the fires of battle. One day, Mike called for a special meeting. As we gathered in the main hall, there was a sense of anticipation in the air. Mike stood before us, his expression serious but hopeful. "I have some news," he began, his voice carrying through the room. "We've received reports of unusual activity in a small town a few hundred miles from here. It could be nothing, but given our experiences, we can't afford to take any chances." He paused, looking around at the faces of his comrades. "I'm assembling a team to investigate. We need to be prepared for anything. This could be the start of something new, or it could be a false alarm. Either way, we need to be ready." Emma and I exchanged a glance, our determination mirrored in each other's eyes. "We're with you, Mike," I said, stepping forward. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it." Mike nodded, a sense of relief and gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Jack. And thank you, all of you. We'll approach this carefully and methodically. We've learned a lot from our past experiences, and we'll use that knowledge to ensure our success." As we prepared for the mission, there was a sense of purpose and excitement in the air. We were ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge and skills we had gained from our previous battles. The journey to the small town was filled with a mixture of anticipation and caution. We knew that we had to be prepared for anything, but we also knew that we were capable of handling whatever came our way. When we arrived, the town seemed peaceful and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos we had faced in the past. But we knew better than to let our guard down. We began our investigation, carefully combing through the town for any signs of unusual activity. As we delved deeper, we uncovered clues that pointed to a potential threat. Strange occurrences, unexplained disappearances, and rumors of a shadowy figure lurking in the night. It was clear that something was amiss, and we needed to get to the bottom of it. One evening, as we gathered in the town's small inn to discuss our findings, there was a knock at the door. A young woman stood there, her face pale and filled with fear. "Please, you have to help us," she said, her voice trembling. "There's something in the woods. It's been taking people. We're all terrified." Mike stepped forward, his expression serious. "We'll help you. Can you tell us everything you know?" The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. "It started a few weeks ago. People started disappearing and strange noises could be heard at night. We thought it might be wild animals, but then we saw it, a shadowy figure moving through the trees." She shuddered, her fear palpable. "It's like nothing we've ever seen. We don't know what to do." Mike placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll handle this. You're safe now." As the woman left, we gathered to discuss our next steps. "It sounds like we're dealing with another supernatural threat," Mike said, his voice filled with determination. "We need to find it and put an end to it before more people get hurt." Emma nodded, her eyes sharp. "We'll need to set up a perimeter and conduct a thorough search of the woods. We can't leave any stone unturned." Alex, who had been studying the map of the area, pointed to a specific location. "This is where most of the disappearances have occurred. It's the densest part of the forest, and it's likely where our target is hiding." I looked around at my friends and comrades, feeling a sense of unity and resolve. We've faced worse before. We can handle this. With our plan in place, we set out into the woods, our weapons at the ready. The air was thick with tension, every rustle of leaves and distant sound putting us on high alert. As we moved deeper into the forest, the sense of unease grew stronger. The shadows seemed to shift and move, and the feeling of being watched was almost overwhelming. Suddenly, a figure darted out from the trees, moving with unnatural speed. "There!" Mike shouted, raising his crossbow. We pursued the figure, our hearts pounding with adrenaline. The chase was intense, the figure weaving through the trees with a grace and agility that was almost supernatural. Finally, we cornered it in a small clearing. The figure turned to face us, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. It was humanoid but twisted and deformed, its features contorted into a grotesque mask of hatred. "You think you can stop me?" It hissed, its voice filled with malice. "I am eternal. I am the darkness, Mike stepped forward, his expression resolute. "We've stopped worse than you. This ends now." The battle erupted in a flurry of movement and violence. The creature was incredibly powerful, its attacks swift and deadly, but we fought with a determination that could not be quelled. "Keep at it," Emma shouted, her weapon flashing in the dim light. "We can take it down." With a final, coordinated effort, we managed to drive our silver knives into the creature's heart. It let out a blood-curdling scream before collapsing into dust. As the dust settled, we stood in silence, our breaths heavy with exhaustion. We had done it. The threat had been eliminated. "We did it," Alex said, his voice filled with relief. "The town is safe." Mike nodded, his expression a mixture of pride and determination. "We've faced incredible odds and emerged victorious, but our work is far from over. We'll continue to protect the innocent and ensure that the darkness never returns." As we made our way back to the town, I felt a sense of fulfillment and purpose. We had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, and I knew that we were ready for whatever came next. The battle was over, but our mission was far from complete. We would remain vigilant, always ready to stand against the darkness. And as the sun rose on a new day, casting its golden light over the landscape, we knew that we were prepared for whatever came next. We were hunters, defenders of the light, and we would never stop fighting. New purpose. In the weeks following our final battle against the vampire nests, the Order of the Sun began to rebuild and regroup. The loss of Samuel still weighed heavily on us, but it also fueled our determination to continue his mission. We had faced incredible odds and emerged victorious, but we knew that our work was far from over. The world was still filled with darkness, and we were the ones who had to stand against it. One evening, as the sun set and cast long shadows over the headquarters, Mike called a meeting. We gathered in the main hall, the atmosphere charged with a mix of anticipation and determination. Mike stood at the head of the table, his face serious but filled with purpose. "We've accomplished a great deal, but our mission is far from complete. The threat we faced was significant, but it's not the only one out there. We need to expand our reach and strengthen our network. There are still innocent lives at risk, and it's our duty to protect them." Emma nodded, her eyes sharp. "We need to be proactive. We can't wait for the darkness to come to us. We need to seek it out and destroy it before it has a chance to harm anyone else." Rebecca, ever the strategist, added, "We should establish outposts in key locations, places where we know there have been reports of supernatural activity. This way we can respond quickly and effectively." Alex, who had proven himself a valuable asset in gathering and analyzing intel, spoke up next. "We've been relying on our network of contacts, but we need to formalize it. Create a structured system for reporting and responding to threats. This will allow us to be more organized and efficient." Mike nodded in agreement. "Good. We'll start by identifying the key locations for our outposts. We'll need volunteers to lead these outposts and ensure they're fully operational. This is a big step, but it's necessary if we're going to keep the darkness at bay." I looked around at the faces of my friends and comrades, feeling a sense of unity and resolve. "Count me in," I said, stepping forward. "Whatever it takes, I'm ready." Emma placed a hand on my shoulder, her eyes filled with determination. "Me too. We're in this together, and we'll face whatever comes our way." As we continued to discuss our plans, the sense of purpose and commitment in the room was palpable. We had faced incredible odds and emerged stronger, and now we were ready to take our mission to the next level. Over the next few weeks, we worked tirelessly to establish our new outposts. Each location was carefully chosen based on reports of supernatural activity and strategic importance. We recruited and trained new members, ensuring that each outpost was fully staffed and prepared for any threat. One evening, as I was preparing to leave for my assigned outpost, Mike pulled me aside. "Jack, I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done. You've shown incredible courage and determination, and I have no doubt that you'll be a great leader." I nodded, feeling a mix of pride and responsibility. "Thanks, Mike, I won't let you down." He smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "I know you won't. Remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together. If you ever need anything, we're just a call away." As I left the headquarters and made my way to the new outpost, I felt a sense of excitement and purpose. This was a new beginning, a chance to make a real difference in the world. The outpost was located in a small town that had seen its share of mysterious disappearances and unexplained phenomena. It was the perfect place to establish a presence and show the people that they were not alone. When I arrived, I was greeted by the team that had been assembled to join me. There was Sarah, a young and eager hunter with a keen eye and quick reflexes; Mark, a former soldier with a wealth of tactical knowledge; and Lisa, a tech expert who had been instrumental in setting up our communication systems. "Welcome to the team," I said, smiling at them. "We have a lot of work to do, but I know we're up to the challenge." Sarah grinned, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I'm ready to get started. Let's show them what we're made of." Mark nodded, his expression serious. "We're here to protect people, and that's exactly what we're going to do." Lisa adjusted her glasses, her fingers already flying over her tablet. "I've got our systems up and running. We'll be able to monitor any activity and respond quickly." As we settled into our new roles, the sense of purpose and camaraderie grew stronger. We conducted patrols, investigated reports of unusual activity, and established connections with the local community. People were initially wary, but as they saw our dedication and commitment, they began to trust us and come to us for help. One evening, as we were finishing a patrol, a local woman named Mrs. Abernathy approached us. She was a kind, elderly woman who had been living in the town for decades. "Thank you for what you're doing," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "It's been a long time since we've felt safe here. Knowing that you're here, watching over us, it means a lot." I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "It's our duty, Mrs. Abernathy. We're here to protect you and everyone else in this town." She nodded, her eyes misting with tears. "You remind me of my son. He was always so brave, always wanting to help others. I'm sure he would be proud of you." As she walked away, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why we did what we did: to protect the innocent and ensure that the darkness never had a chance to take hold. As the weeks turned into months, our outpost became a beacon of hope for the town. We faced challenges and dangers, but we met them head-on, knowing that we were making a difference. One evening, as we gathered around a campfire, Mark turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "Jack, do you ever think about the future? What comes next?" I nodded, gazing into the flames. "All the time. I think about the world we're trying to build, one where people don't have to live in fear. It's a long road, but I believe we can get there." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes filled with determination. "We've already made a difference. We've saved lives and we've shown people that they're not alone. That's something to be proud of." Lisa smiled, her fingers tapping a rhythm on her tablet. "And we're just getting started. There's so much more we can do, so many more people we can help." As we sat there, the sense of unity and purpose was stronger than ever. We had faced incredible odds and emerged victorious, and now we were ready to face whatever came next. The battle against the darkness would never truly be over, but we were prepared. We were the Order of the Sun, and we would stand as guardians against the night, always ready to protect the innocent and ensure that the light prevailed. In the days that followed, we continued our mission with unwavering resolve. We trained new recruits, shared our knowledge, and strengthened our network. The Order's influence grew, and our presence became a source of hope and reassurance for people across the region. One afternoon, as I was working on a report in my office, Mike contacted me through our secure communication system. "Jack, we've received reports of unusual activity in a nearby town. I'm sending you the details now." I quickly reviewed the information, my eyes narrowing as I read. "It looks like there's a new threat emerging. We'll head there immediately." Mike's voice was steady. Be careful, Jack. We don't know what we're dealing with yet. Gather as much intel as you can and proceed with caution. I assembled the team and briefed them on the situation. We've got a new mission. There have been reports of strange occurrences in a nearby town. We need to investigate and determine the nature of the threat. Sarah nodded, her expression serious. We're ready. Let's move out. We arrived in the town just before sunset, the air heavy with tension. The locals were on edge, their fear palpable. We began our investigation, speaking with residents and gathering information. One man, Mr. Thompson, described seeing shadowy figures moving through the woods at night. It's like nothing I've ever seen, he said, his voice trembling. They're not human, I'm sure of it. As we delved deeper, we uncovered evidence of a new supernatural threat, a group of malevolent spirits that had been drawn to the area by a series of tragic events. These spirits were powerful and dangerous, feeding on the fear and suffering of the living. We need to put a stop to this, I said, determination in my voice. These spirits are a danger to everyone in this town. Mark nodded, his expression grim. We'll need to be careful. Spirits can be unpredictable and difficult to combat. Lisa began setting up her equipment, her fingers moving quickly over the controls. I've got the tools we need to track and neutralize them. We'll have to lure them out and then use our containment devices to trap them. As night fell, we prepared for the confrontation. We set up a perimeter around the area where the spirits had been seen and waited, our senses on high alert. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the trees, and the air grew thick with a sense of malevolence. The spirits appeared, their forms shifting and writhing in the darkness. There they are, Sarah shouted, raising her weapon. Get ready. The spirits moved with unnatural speed, their ghostly forms evading our attacks. But we fought with determination, using our knowledge and tools to counter their supernatural abilities. Keep them contained, Lisa shouted, her eyes fixed on her equipment. We need to weaken them before we can trap them. As the battle raged on, we coordinated our efforts, driving the spirits back and weakening their hold on the physical world. Finally, with a coordinated effort, we activated our containment devices, trapping the spirits and neutralizing their threat. The air grew still, and the sense of malevolence dissipated. We had done it. The spirits were contained and the town was safe. We did it, Mark said, his voice filled with relief. The town is safe. Sarah grinned, her eyes shining with pride. We make a pretty good team, don't we? Lisa smiled, her fingers still flying over her controls. We do, and we'll keep getting better. As we returned to the town, the residents greeted us with gratitude and relief. We had faced the darkness and emerged victorious once again. Back at the outpost, we debriefed and discussed our findings. Mike contacted us to congratulate us on our success. Well done, team. You've shown once again why the Order of the Sun is so important. Keep up the good work. As we settled in for the night, I felt a sense of fulfillment and purpose. We had faced incredible odds and emerged stronger, and now we were ready to face whatever came next. The battle against the darkness would never truly be over, but we were prepared. We were the Order of the Sun, and we would stand as guardians against the night, always ready to protect the innocent and ensure that the light prevailed. With the initial wave of vampire threats neutralized and our new outposts established, the Order of the Sun settled into a routine of vigilance and readiness. Our mission remained clear: to protect the innocent and stand as a bulwark against the encroaching darkness. Yet, as we well knew, the enemy was ever adapting, always seeking new ways to infiltrate and corrupt. We had to be equally relentless. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of training new recruits and updating our surveillance systems, I found myself on the roof of our headquarters, gazing out over the city. The sun had set, and the twinkling lights of the buildings below created a comforting mosaic against the darkening sky. The quiet moment was a rare reprieve from the constant demands of our mission. Emma joined me, her footsteps light and almost imperceptible. She handed me a mug of steaming coffee, her face reflecting the same weariness I felt. You look like you could use this, she said, her tone soft, yet tinged with the strength that defined her. Thanks, I replied, accepting the mug with a grateful nod. I needed a break. Sometimes it feels like we're just one step ahead of the darkness, always waiting for the next threat to appear. Emma leaned on the railing beside me, her eyes scanning the horizon. That's why we're here, Jack, to make sure we stay that step ahead. We've made incredible progress, but we can't afford to let our guard down. I nodded, taking a sip of the hot coffee. You're right. It feels like the calm before the storm. I can't shake the feeling that something big is coming. Emma's expression turned serious. You're not the only one. There's been chatter among our contacts. Strange sightings, whispers of an ancient force stirring. We need to be prepared for anything. Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Alex emerged from the stairwell, his face a mask of urgency. Jack, Emma, we need you downstairs. There's been a development. Setting my mug down, I exchanged a worried glance with Emma before following Alex back into the building. The tension in the air was palpable as we made our way to the main hall, where Mike and Rebecca were waiting. Mike's face was grave as he addressed us. We've received a report from one of our outposts. There's been a series of attacks in a nearby town, and the signs point to something we haven't encountered before. It's unlike any of the vampire activity we've seen. Rebecca laid a map on the table, pointing to a location circled in red. The attacks are concentrated in this area. The victims are left drained of energy, but there are no bite marks. It's as if their life force is being siphoned away. Emma frowned, leaning over the map. Could it be some form of magic or another supernatural entity? Mike nodded. That's our working theory. We need to investigate and determine the nature of this new threat. If it's something we haven't faced before, we need to understand it and find a way to counter it. I looked around at my comrades, feeling the familiar surge of determination. Let's get to it. We need to gather as much information as possible and prepare for whatever we might face. We quickly assembled a team and set out for the town, our minds racing with possibilities. The drive was filled with a tense silence, each of us lost in our thoughts about the new threat. The town was eerily quiet when we arrived, the air heavy with a sense of foreboding. Our first stop was the local hospital where the victims of the attacks were being treated. Dr. Harris, the attending physician, met us with a grim expression. I've never seen anything like this, he said, leading us to the intensive care unit. The patients are in a coma-like state, their vital signs weak. It's as if their life energy has been drained away. Emma examined one of the patients, a middle-aged woman who lay motionless, her skin pale and her breathing shallow. There are no physical wounds, no signs of trauma. Whatever did this, it's not something we can fight with conventional means. I turned to Dr. Harris. Has there been any pattern to the attacks? Specific times, locations, anything that might give us a clue? He nodded, handing us a folder with detailed reports. The attacks have all occurred at night, and the victims were found in isolated areas around town. There's no clear connection between them, other than the nature of their condition. As we reviewed the reports, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The attacks were becoming more frequent, and the areas where the victims were found seemed to form a rough perimeter around the town. It's as if something is encircling the town, cutting off any chance of escape, Alex said, tracing the pattern on the map with his finger. Whatever this is, it's methodical and precise. Mike's expression darkened. We need to find out what's causing this and stop it before it claims more lives. Let's divide into teams and start investigating the areas where the attacks occurred. Look for anything unusual, any signs of supernatural activity. We split into teams and began our search, moving cautiously through the darkened streets and alleys. The town was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant rustling of leaves in the wind. As we reached the edge of the town, Emma and I spotted a faint glow emanating from a nearby grove of trees. "Do you see that?" Emma whispered, her hand resting on her weapon. I nodded, signaling for her to follow me. We approached the grove, our senses on high alert. The glow grew brighter as we drew closer, and we soon found ourselves standing before an ancient-looking stone circle, the air around it crackling with energy. "This is definitely not natural," Emma said, her eyes wide. "It looks like some kind of ritual site." As we examined the stones, we found strange symbols carved into their surfaces, symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light. I reached out to touch one of the stones, feeling a surge of energy pass through me. "We need to get Mike and the others here," I said, pulling out my radio. "We've found something big." Within minutes, Mike, Rebecca, and Alex joined us at the site, their expressions a mix of awe and concern. "This is powerful magic," Rebecca said, running her fingers over the symbols. "I've seen these markings before in texts about ancient rituals designed to siphon life energy." Mike's jaw tightened. "We need to find out who's behind this and stop them. If they're using this ritual to drain the life force from the townspeople, they won't stop until they've taken everyone." As we continued to investigate the site, we discovered a hidden entrance leading underground. The air grew colder as we descended, the darkness pressing in around us. Our flashlights cast eerie shadows on the walls, revealing more symbols and signs of ritual activity. "This is it," Alex said, his voice echoing in the narrow passage. "We're getting close." We reached a large underground chamber, where the source of the glow was revealed, a massive crystal, pulsating with a malevolent light. Surrounding the crystal were robed figures, chanting in a language that sent shivers down my spine. Mike signaled for us to spread out and surround the chamber. "We need to disrupt the ritual and destroy that crystal," he whispered. "Be ready for anything." We moved into position, our weapons at the ready. On Mike's signal, we sprang into action, attacking the robed figures and disrupting the ritual. The chamber erupted into chaos as the figures fought back, their eyes glowing with a dark energy. "Destroy the crystal," Mike shouted, fending off one of the attackers. I made my way to the crystal, feeling the energy pulsing from it grow stronger. With a determined shout, I swung my weapon, shattering the crystal into 1,000 pieces. A shockwave of energy blasted through the chamber, sending the robed figures flying and extinguishing the glow. As the dust settled, we regrouped, our breaths heavy with exertion. The chamber was now dark and silent. The malevolent energy dissipated. "We did it," Emma said, her voice filled with relief. "The ritual is broken." Mike nodded, his expression one of grim satisfaction. "We need to make sure there are no more of these sites. Search the area thoroughly." We spent the next few hours combing through the underground passages, ensuring that no remnants of the ritual remained. When we finally emerged, the first light of dawn was breaking over the town. Back at the hospital, we were met with a sight that filled us with hope. The victims of the attacks were beginning to stir, their vital signs improving. Dr. Harris approached us, his face beaming with gratitude. "Whatever you did, it worked. They're waking up." As we watched the townspeople slowly regain their strength, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. We had faced an unknown threat and emerged victorious, saving countless lives in the process. Back at our outpost, we debriefed and shared our experiences. Mike addressed the team, his voice filled with pride. "We've proven once again why the Order of the Sun is so important. We faced an ancient and powerful threat and defeated it. But we must remain vigilant. The darkness will always find new ways to challenge us, and we need to be ready." Emma placed a hand on my shoulder, her eyes filled with warmth. "You did great out there, Jack, we all did. This is what it's all about, protecting the innocent and standing against the darkness." I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "We'll keep fighting no matter what. We're in this together." As we settled in for the night, the sense of unity and determination among us was stronger than ever. We had faced incredible odds and emerged stronger, ready to face whatever came next. The battle against the darkness would never truly be over, but we were prepared. We were the Order of the Sun, and we would stand as guardians against the night, always ready to protect the innocent and ensure that the light prevailed.